My sister-in-law did not check in on me for 4 years. At Christmas dinner, I casually said I sold my company and stayed home to raise my child. Your little worthless business, she mocked. How much did you sell it for? I replied, $600 million. Her jaw dropped. My in-laws fell dead silent. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in the affluent enclaves of Atlanta, my family treated success as a weapon rather than a goal. My parents, Vivian and Harrison, worshipped at the altar of high society and traditional appearances. Every Sunday church service, every charity gala, every country club dinner was an opportunity to project absolute perfection. In their eyes, my older brother Jamal was the crown prince of our lineage. He was the golden child, the male heir, who could do no wrong, destined to carry the family name into the upper echelons of generational wealth. I, on the other hand, was the constant disappointment. I was too analytical, too outspoken, and decidedly unfeminine for choosing to build a cybersecurity firm instead of marrying into a legacy family and hosting garden parties. Tonight, the sprawling suburban estate Jamal shared with his white wife Lauren was decorated to the point of absurdity. Garlands of fresh pine and imported white roses cascaded down the grand staircase. The mahogany dining table groaned under the weight of crystal decanters, silver platters, and an extravagant holiday feast. I sat near the end of the table, keeping a watchful eye on my 4-year-old son Leo, who was quietly eating his mashed potatoes. I had attended this dinner purely out of a sense of obligation, a fleeting hope that the holiday spirit might bridge the massive canyon between us. I was entirely wrong. The hostility began before the main course was even served. Lauren, wearing a designer silk dress that clearly cost more than a small car, picked up her silver spoon. She tapped it against her crystal wine glass. The sharp, high-pitched sound sliced through the soft holiday music playing in the background. The low murmur of family conversation ceased immediately. Everyone turned their attention to Lauren, treating her with the deferential silence my parents always reserved for her. "I think we need to have a serious family conversation," Lauren announced, her voice echoing in the cavernous dining room. She fixed her gaze entirely on me, a condescending smirk playing on her lips. "Kendra, we are all incredibly concerned about the example you are setting for little Leo. It breaks my heart to see a child growing up with a mother who refuses to contribute to society." The air in the room grew thick and heavy. I felt the immediate familiar sting of their collective judgment. My mother Vivian took a delicate sip of her wine, nodding in agreement with Lauren. My father Harrison crossed his arms and stared at me from the head of the table. "You have been a jobless freeloader for 4 years," Lauren continued, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. "We all know you are just sitting at home living off the life insurance money David left behind when he passed away. It is disgraceful. You are draining a dead man's legacy because you refuse to get a real job. You need to grow up, Kendra. You need to stop playing around with computers and face reality." I did not cry. I did not flinch. I did not offer them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I carefully picked up my linen napkin, wiped the corners of my mouth, and placed my silver fork silently beside my plate. I looked directly into Lauren's pale blue eyes. My voice was completely steady, devoid of the emotional hysteria they were desperately trying to provoke. "I actually sold my company last month," I said casually, letting the words drift across the table. "I decided to step down as CEO and stay home to raise my child full-time." Lauren let out a sharp, theatrical bark of laughter. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the imported lace tablecloth. "Your little, worthless business," she mocked, rolling her eyes. "That glorified basement hobby you have been wasting your life on. Please, Kendra, do not insult our intelligence. How much did you possibly sell that disaster for?" "Enough to buy a used Honda. $600 million, I replied. The sheer magnitude of the number struck the room with the force of a physical blow. Lauren's jaw actually dropped, her mocking smile vanishing instantly. The silence that swallowed the dining room was absolute, profound, and deafening. I could hear the faint crackle of the fireplace from the adjacent living room. My mother froze with her wine glass hovering inches from her mouth. My father's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. "That is impossible," Lauren sputtered, her face flushing a deep, angry crimson. "You are lying. You are a pathological liar. You were begging for our help 4 years ago. You were a broke pregnant widow crying in a hospital bed." Her harsh words brought the memories rushing back with brutal clarity. 4 years ago, when my husband David died suddenly in a car accident, my entire world collapsed. I was 8 months pregnant with Leo. I had poured every ounce of my savings into building my cybersecurity data firm. I had gone to my family asking for a temporary loan just to cover my mortgage until my initial business contracts paid out. They had flatly refused. My mother Vivian slammed her hand on the table, now her voice shrill and accusatory. "Lauren is right. You are fabricating this nonsense to save face. When David died, we told you exactly what you needed to do. We told you to shut down that ridiculous startup. We arranged an interview for you to work as a bank teller. It was a respectable, safe job. But you were too arrogant. You refused to listen to your elders. You chose to sit in your house and play with data codes while your husband was barely cold in the ground." I turned my gaze to my mother, feeling a profound sense of detachment from the woman who had birthed me. "I did not beg you for charity, Vivian," I stated, my voice sharp and precise. "I offered you equity in a company that was on the verge of securing government defense contracts. You called my life's work an embarrassment to the family name. You told me that women do not belong in technology. You left a grieving pregnant widow to fend for herself because my ambition offended your outdated social sensibilities." I turned my attention back to Lauren, who was now clutching her wine glass so tightly her knuckles were white. "The acquisition firm is called Apex Global Holdings," I explained, utilizing the cold clinical financial terminology that usually intimidated them. "They purchased my proprietary encryption algorithm and the entire corporate infrastructure of my firm in an all-cash buyout. The transfer was finalized on November 15th. The funds have already cleared multiple offshore and domestic accounts. I am entirely self-made, Lauren. I built a technology empire while you were busy failing to sell overpriced handbags at that boutique my father finances for you." Lauren gasped, her eyes darting toward my father in sheer panic. The fact that I knew about her failing business clearly unnerved her. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She was entirely disarmed by my unshakable confidence and the irrefutable details I had just laid out before her. "This is garbage," Jamal bellowed. My older brother pushed his chair back with such violent force that it tipped over and crashed onto the hardwood floor. Jamal stood towering over the table, his chest heaving with rage. The golden child could never handle being upstaged, especially not by the sister he viewed as completely inferior. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You are sitting at my dinner table lying through your teeth," Jamal shouted, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You think you can just march in here and invent a fantasy to make yourself look important? You printed out some fake documents or read a Wikipedia article about corporate buyouts, and now you expect us to bow down to you. You are nothing, Kendra. You have always been nothing." He stormed away from the dining table, his heavy footsteps thudding down the hallway toward his home office. The room remained trapped in a suffocating silence while he was gone. My mother stared at me with pure venom, silently blaming me for ruining her perfect holiday gathering. My father refused to make eye contact, staring intensely at his plate. Leo tugged at my sleeve, completely oblivious to the venomous adult warfare surrounding him. I gently stroked my son's hair, projecting a calm exterior while preparing for the inevitable escalation. Jamal returned a moment later. He was clutching a thick manila folder. He marched back to his spot at the table and violently threw the folder down right in front of my plate. He pulled out a heavy notarized document and slammed it onto the mahogany wood. "Look at this," Jamal demanded, his voice thick with arrogant pride. "Read the paper, Kendra. This is the deed to this estate. This house is worth $3 million. This is what real, tangible wealth looks like. I employ 50 people at my logistics firm. I provide for this family. I elevate our name in the community. I hold real assets, not some imaginary tech money you dreamed up to make yourself feel less pathetic." He leaned across the table, his face inches from mine. his eyes burning with intense malice. You do not get to come into my home, eat my food, and disrespect my wife with your delusions of grandeur. You are an embarrassment. Stop humiliating yourself, pack up your kid, and get out of my house right now. I did not move a single muscle. I looked down at the physical deed resting on the table. The expensive parchment paper practically glowed under the chandelier light. I read the text slowly, savoring the absolute certainty of the weapon I was about to deploy. I looked back up at my brother, taking in his puffed-out chest and his desperate need to maintain his superiority. I reached out and calmly picked up the document. "This is a fascinating piece of paper, Jamal," I said softly. I smoothed out the edges of the deed, letting my eyes trace the legal jargon printed across the page. Jamal stood over me, his arms crossed over his chest, waiting for me to crumble under the weight of his supposed real estate triumph. Instead, I placed my finger directly on the second paragraph of the document and pushed it back across the smooth mahogany surface toward him. "You should really learn to read your own financial documents before you use them to threaten people," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a surgical blade. "Look right here, Jamal. Look at the name of the primary lien holder." Jamal snatched the paper up, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the text. He scoffed dismissively. "It says Vanguard Holdings LLC. That is the corporate investment firm that bought out my original mortgage 2 years ago. What is your point, Kendra? Are you going to pretend you understand commercial real estate now, too?" "My point, Jamal, is that Vanguard Holdings LLC is not a faceless corporate entity," I replied, leaning back in my chair and crossing my legs. "Vanguard Holdings is a subsidiary portfolio created by my wealth management team. I am the sole proprietor and CEO of that holding company." The color completely drained from Jamal's face. The arrogant sneer vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. He stared at the paper, then stared at me, his breathing suddenly shallow and ragged. Lauren let out a confused gasp, grabbing the deed from her husband's hands to read it for herself. "You do not own this house, Jamal," I stated clearly, ensuring every single person at the table heard my words. "You are not a homeowner. You are my tenant. And according to my portfolio managers, you are currently 90 days past due on your mortgage payments. The house you use to project your elite status, the estate you use to host these lavish, condescending dinners, belongs entirely to the sister you just tried to throw out into the street." Lauren dropped the deed as if it had caught fire. She looked at Jamal, her voice trembling with panic. "Jamal, tell me she is lying. Tell me she does not own our house. Tell me we are not defaulting on the mortgage." Jamal could not speak. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles stark white, his eyes fixed on the floor. His silence was the loudest confession possible. The golden child was entirely bankrupt, living a devastating lie funded by the very person he despised. Vivian, unable to handle the destruction of her perfect son's image, slammed her hand onto the table once more. A crystal glass toppled over, spilling dark red wine across the white lace tablecloth like a bleeding wound. She stood up, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me. "How dare you!" Vivian shrieked, her voice echoing with decades of deep-seated misogyny and blatant favoritism. "How dare you plot behind our backs to humiliate your brother? Jamal is the male heir of this family. He is the pride of our community. He deserves absolute protection and respect. You have always been too ambitious, too cold, and too unfeminine for your own good. You deliberately bought his debt just to emasculate him in front of his wife." I looked at my mother, feeling a profound wave of pity for her deeply ingrained ignorance. "I did not seek out his debt, Vivian. My portfolio managers acquired distressed assets across the entire state. Jamal's mortgage was flagged because he is a terrible businessman who hemorrhages money to maintain a fake lifestyle. I only realized I owned this house 3 days ago when I reviewed the quarterly delinquency reports." Vivian marched around the table, standing directly beside Jamal as if to shield him physically from the truth. She glared down at me, her chest heaving with desperate, calculating energy. "You will fix this," she demanded. "You are going to sign over the deed to this house directly to Jamal right here tonight. Consider it a Christmas gift to honor the family name. You have $600 million. You do not need this property. You will forgive his debt and transfer the title immediately." I looked at her in absolute disbelief. You want me to reward his financial incompetence and verbal abuse by handing him a $3 million estate for free. If you refuse to do this, Vivian said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, threatening whisper, I will expose your darkest secret, Kendra. I will go to your new corporate partners. I will go to the media. I will tell the entire world the truth about the circumstances of David's death and the life insurance payout. I will ruin your perfect new reputation before you even get the chance to enjoy it. She smiled, a cold, victorious smirk spreading across her face. She truly believed she held the ultimate trump card. She believed she could leverage my past grief to secure her son's financial future. I did not flinch at the blackmail. Instead, I reached down and picked up my designer leather tote bag from the floor. I unclasped the gold hardware and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of audited bank statements. I dropped them directly onto the center of the mahogany table, right over the spilled red wine. The secret you think you hold is a delusion, Vivian, I said smoothly. But the secret I hold is a federal crime. I turned my attention to my father, Harrison, who had been sitting frozen in his chair this entire time. I pointed to the stack of papers. Tell them, Harrison. Tell your perfect wife and your golden son what those documents are. Harrison swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. He refused to look at the papers. Since you suddenly lost your voice, I will explain it to them. I continued, my voice ringing with absolute authority. When David died, he left behind a $1 million life insurance policy intended to secure a future for me and Leo. Because I was hospitalized with severe preeclampsia during Leo's birth, Harrison generously offered to handle the initial legal paperwork and estate transfers. What he actually did was forge my signature on a power of attorney document and illegally divert $600,000 of my husband's death benefits into a hidden trust. Lauren gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Jamal stared at his father in shock. You thought I was too broken by grief to ever track the missing funds, I said, staring directly into my father's terrified eyes. But you forgot that I analyze financial data algorithms for a living. I tracked every single stolen cent. You did not use that money for the church. You did not use it for community investments. You funneled every dollar directly into Lauren's failing luxury boutique to keep your white daughter-in-law happy and to maintain Jamal's fraudulent image of extreme wealth. Harrison finally cracked. He slammed his hands on his knees, attempting to justify the theft loudly to the room. I was protecting the family assets, he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. Men are equipped to handle large finances. You were too emotionally unstable as a grieving widow. You would have wasted that money on that ridiculous computer company. Jamal needed the capital to project stability for his logistics firm. It was an investment in our legacy. You stole from your widowed daughter and your newborn grandson to fund designer handbags and a fake lifestyle, I fired back, slicing through his pathetic rationalization. You committed felony wire fraud and grand larceny. Realizing that her boutique's massive failures and her direct complicity in the theft were now public knowledge, Lauren abruptly changed her tactics. She attempted to weaponize her race and her social standing, a move I had anticipated from the moment I sat down. Lauren began crying hysterically, hyperventilating as she backed away from the table. She played the absolute victim, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her smartphone, pointing the camera directly at me. You are threatening us, Lauren sobbed loudly, her voice engineered perfectly for an audience. I am going live on my platform right now. I have 400,000 followers. I am going to tell them that you are an aggressive, threatening woman trying to ruin my small business. I am going to tell them you are trying to physically intimidate my family and extort us. She held the phone up high, her thumb hovering over the record button, ready to destroy my public image and the reputation of my new brand. I remained utterly unbothered. I leaned back in my chair, picked up my coffee cup, and took a slow, deliberate sip. I suggest you remember what I actually do for a living before you press that button, Lauren, I said calmly. My company specializes in elite cybersecurity and digital forensics. I hunt ghosts on the dark web. Do you really want to invite the public into this dining room right now? Lauren hesitated, her thumb shaking over the screen. Because if you go live, I will show your audience exactly what else I found while tracing my father's stolen money, I promised. I pulled my own smartphone from my pocket. I tapped the screen 3 times, casting a highly encrypted file directly onto the living room's massive 70-inch smart TV mounted on the wall behind Jamal. The screen flared to life, illuminating the dining room with stark white light. Displayed in high definition was irrefutable proof of Lauren's systematic embezzlement from Jamal's own business accounts. Spreadsheets, wire transfers, and hidden emails cascaded across the television screen. Lauren has been quietly siphoning money from your logistics firm for the past 2 years, Jamal explained, pointing to the screen. She has been draining your assets and hiding the funds in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. She has been consulting with high-profile divorce attorneys in Manhattan for the last 6 months. She used my stolen life insurance money to prop up her boutique, and then she stole from you to fund her exit strategy. Jamal turned slowly to look at the television. He stared at the highlighted bank transfers, recognizing his wife's signature and his own depleted account numbers. His reaction perfectly encapsulated his lifelong habit of choosing comfortable lies over harsh truths. He looked at Lauren, shaking his head in pathetic denial. "Lauren, tell me this is fake," Jamal pleaded, his voice breaking. "Tell me she hacked this to frame you." Lauren did not answer. She lowered her phone, her face completely drained of color. She looked trapped, realizing her entire exit strategy had just been blown to pieces in front of the very people she was robbing. Realizing that Lauren was a traitor, that Jamal was completely broke, and that their social standing was entirely obliterated, Vivian and Harrison abruptly changed tactics. The sheer speed of their hypocrisy was astounding. They turned their backs on Jamal and Lauren instantly. Vivian smoothed down her silk dress, forced a sickly sweet smile onto her face, and walked slowly toward my end of the table. "Kendra, my beautiful daughter Vivian," purred her voice, dripping with sudden, desperate affection. "We had no idea Lauren was capable of such deceit. She manipulated your father. She manipulated all of us. You have uncovered a terrible betrayal tonight." Harrison quickly joined her, nodding vigorously. "We will disown Jamal immediately," he promised, throwing his golden child to the wolves without a second thought. "We will throw Lauren out into the snow tonight. You just need to take care of your real family, Kendra. We can help you manage your new wealth. The Lord has blessed you with this fortune, so we can rebuild the family legacy together." They were attempting to manipulate my childhood craving for parental love, using religious rhetoric to justify their sudden loyalty to my bank account. They painted Jamal and Lauren as the sole villains, completely washing their hands of their own theft and lifelong emotional abuse. I methodically dismantled their delusion. I reached into my bag one last time and pulled out 3 separate legal documents, placing them side by side on the table. "I do not need your help managing my wealth, Vivian," I said coldly. "And I certainly do not need a relationship with criminals." I tapped the first document. "This is a legally binding repayment schedule for the $600,000 you stole from my husband's life insurance. You will repay it with maximum legal interest. If you miss a single payment, my legal team will file immediate federal felony charges against both of you." I tapped the second document. "This is the formal legal eviction notice for Jamal and Lauren. You have exactly 30 days to vacate my property. If you damage a single fixture on your way out, I will seize Lauren's boutique to cover the damages." I tapped the final document. "And this is a comprehensive cease and desist order. It prevents Vivian and Harrison from ever using my name, my company's name, or my son's name in any of your community circles to leverage social capital. You will never claim my success as your own. You will never pretend we have a loving relationship. Our connection ends tonight." I exposed the core hypocrisy of their entire existence. "Your love was always purely transactional," I said, looking at the broken, shattered people surrounding me. "But my success was built entirely in your absence. You abandoned me when I needed you most. Now you get to live with the consequences of your choices." I stripped them of every defense, leaving them financially and socially naked. Humiliated, broke, and stripped of his golden child status forever, Jamal lost his mind. He let out a guttural scream, a sound born of pure primal entitlement being denied for the first time in his life. He made one final, desperate physical lunge across the table, his arms outstretched, intending to destroy the eviction notices and the flash drive plugged into the television. I did not even have to raise my hands to protect myself. The elite private security detail I had hired to wait discreetly outside the dining room doors stepped in instantly. Two massive men in tailored black suits moved with terrifying precision. They intercepted Jamal mid-lunge, twisting his arms behind his back and pinning him face down against the hardwood floor before he could even brush the edge of my documents. Jamal thrashed against the floor, shouting obscenities, while Lauren backed into a corner completely terrified. Vivian and Harrison stood frozen in horror, realizing that I held absolute, undeniable power over their futures. I was untouchable. I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles from my tailored wool coat. I picked up the signed legal documents, placed them neatly back into my designer bag, and looked down at my brother struggling weakly against the security guards. "Ensure they understand the terms of their eviction," I instructed the guards quietly. "Do not let them follow me out." I walked out of the suffocating house into the crisp, freezing winter air. The cold breeze felt incredible against my skin, cleansing me of the decades of toxicity I had endured inside those walls. I walked down the long, sweeping driveway toward my chauffeured black SUV waiting at the curb. The driver opened the door for me. I slid into the warm, luxurious interior. In the back seat, my son Leo was safely buckled into his car seat wearing his favorite dinosaur pajamas and happily watching a cartoon on his tablet with his nanny. He was completely insulated from the warfare that had just occurred, protected from the poison that had infected my own childhood. "Did you have a good dinner, Mommy?" Leo asked, looking up at me with bright, innocent eyes. I smiled a genuine, profound smile of absolute peace. "The best dinner ever, sweetie," I replied, kissing his forehead. "We are going home now." As the SUV pulled away from the estate, leaving my fractured family behind in the ruins of their own making, I knew exactly what the future held. The fallout would be biblical. Lauren and Jamal would engage in a vicious, highly public divorce that would drain whatever minimal funds they had left. The legal fees and the exposure of Lauren's embezzlement would ultimately bankrupt Harrison and Vivian, stripping them of the societal status they valued above their own daughter. But none of that concerned me anymore. I was free. I would continue to thrive, expanding my philanthropic work to support young women of color in technology. I would raise my son in an environment defined by genuine love, formidable generational wealth, and absolute unbreakable peace. I had fought my battles in the dark, and now I would reign in the light. I did not flinch as the heavy parchment paper hit the mahogany table. I simply looked down at the document. Jamal stood over me, his chest puffed out, breathing heavily through his nose like a victorious gladiator. He truly believed he had just delivered the ultimate killing blow. I reached out and picked up the deed. The paper was thick and textured, bearing the embossed golden seal of the county. It was the exact type of ostentatious display my family lived for. Jamal crossed his arms over his tailored suit and demanded that I read it aloud. I took my time. I smoothed the edges of the document with my thumb. I let the silence stretch out, allowing the tension in the room to build until it was thick enough to choke on. Lauren shifted in her seat, her initial panic fading into a smug, expectant grin. She looked around her lavishly decorated dining room, her eyes tracing the imported crown molding and the custom drapery she had bragged about on social media for months. She believed this house was her fortress. She believed it was her ultimate proof of superiority over the sister-in-law she had always deemed unworthy. I looked up from the document and met my brother's furious gaze. "This is a fascinating piece of paper, Jamal," I said, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "I am impressed you actually managed to locate it in your home office, considering how little time you spend managing your actual finances." Jamal scoffed, resting his hands on his hips. "Stop stalling, Kendra," he snapped. "Read the name on the title. Read the address. Acknowledge what real success looks like instead of sitting there projecting your bitter jealousy onto my marriage." I nodded slowly. I read the property address aloud. I read Jamal's name printed in bold black ink as the primary resident. Then I slid my index finger down to the second paragraph, stopping right below the property lines. I tapped the thick paper twice. You should really learn to read your own financial documents before you use them to threaten people, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air like a surgical blade. Look right here, Jamal. Look at the name of the primary lien holder. Jamal rolled his eyes, exasperated by what he assumed was my desperate attempt to deflect. It says Vanguard Holdings, LLC, he answered sharply. That is the corporate investment firm that bought out my original mortgage 2 years ago. They handle high-yield commercial and residential portfolios. What is your point, Kendra? Are you going to pretend you understand commercial real estate now, too? Are you going to try and lecture me about interest rates while you sit there unemployed? Lauren let out a sharp, condescending breath. Really, Kendra, this is getting embarrassing, she added. Jamal runs a highly successful logistics firm. He understands complex corporate financing. You do not need to read a standard mortgage contract to him like he is a child just because you feel insecure about your own life choices. I kept my eyes locked on my brother. My point, Jamal, is that Vanguard Holdings LLC is not a faceless corporate entity, I replied. I leaned back in my chair and gracefully crossed my legs, settling deeply into the dining chair that my money had paid for. Vanguard Holdings is a subsidiary portfolio created directly by my wealth management team. I am the sole proprietor and chief executive officer of that holding company. The color completely drained from Jamal's face. The arrogant sneer vanished in an absolute instant, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. His arms dropped slowly to his sides. He stared at the paper in my hand, then stared at me, his breathing suddenly shallow and ragged. The golden child of the family, the untouchable male heir, suddenly realized he was standing on quicksand. Lauren let out a confused, high-pitched gasp. She reached across the table and grabbed the deed from my hands, nearly tearing the heavy paper in her haste. She scanned the text, her pale blue eyes darting back and forth across the legal jargon she barely understood. Jamal, what is she talking about? Lauren demanded, her voice trembling with rising panic. Tell me she is lying. Tell me she does not own our house. Jamal could not speak. He stood frozen, gripping the edge of the dining table so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. He looked utterly paralyzed. I did not give him the chance to recover. You do not own this house, Jamal. I stated clearly, ensuring the acoustics of the vaulted ceiling carried my words to every single person at the table. You are not a homeowner. You are my tenant. And according to the quarterly delinquency reports my portfolio managers filed last Tuesday, you are currently 90 days past due on your mortgage payments. I watched Lauren's chest heave as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. The house you used to project your elite status to your country club friends? I continued, my voice echoing with unrelenting authority. The estate you used to host these lavish, condescending holiday dinners to prove you are better than me. It belongs entirely to the sister you just tried to throw out into the street. If I make one phone call tomorrow morning, my asset management team will initiate foreclosure proceedings, and the bank will lock the doors on this property before the new year begins. Vivian. My mother violently pushed her chair back, unable to handle the destruction of her perfect son's image. She slammed her hand onto the table. A crystal glass toppled over, spilling dark red wine across the white lace tablecloth like a bleeding wound. She stood up, pointing a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face. How dare you? Vivian shrieked, her voice echoing with decades of deep-seated misogyny and blatant favoritism. How dare you plot behind our backs to humiliate your brother? Jamal is the male heir of this family. He is the pride of our community. He deserves absolute protection and respect. My mother marched around the table, positioning herself physically between me and Jamal, as if to shield him from the consequences of his own financial ruin. You have always been too ambitious, too cold, and too unfeminine for your own good, Vivian snarled. You deliberately bought his debt just to emasculate him in front of his wife. You are trying to destroy the foundation of this family because you are bitter that your own husband left you with nothing but a fatherless child. I looked at my mother, feeling a profound wave of pity for her deeply ingrained ignorance. "I did not seek out his debt, Vivian," I said calmly. "My portfolio managers acquired distressed assets across the entire state. Jamal's mortgage was flagged because he is a terrible businessman who hemorrhages money to maintain a fake lifestyle. I only realized I owned this house 3 days ago when I reviewed the quarterly delinquency reports. Your golden child is drowning in debt, and I am the only reason the bank has not already seized this dining room table." Vivian glared down at me, her chest heaving with desperate calculating energy. "You will fix this," she demanded, her tone shifting from outrage to absolute command. "You are going to sign over the deed to this house directly to Jamal, right here tonight. Consider it a Christmas gift to honor the family name. You have $600 million. You do not need this property. You will forgive his debt and transfer the title immediately." I looked at her in absolute disbelief. "You want me to reward his financial incompetence and verbal abuse by handing him a $3 million estate for free?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "If you refuse to do this," Vivian said, her voice dropping to a vicious, threatening whisper, "I will expose your darkest secret, Kendra. I will go to your new corporate partners. I will go to the media. I will tell the entire world the truth about the circumstances of David's death and the life insurance payout. I will ruin your perfect new reputation before you even get the chance to enjoy it." She smiled, a cold, victorious smirk spreading across her face. She truly believed she held the ultimate trump card. She believed she could leverage my past grief to secure her son's financial future. She stood tall, waiting for me to shatter under the weight of her blackmail. The silence in the dining room shattered the moment the truth registered. Lauren dropped her face into her hands, her carefully curated composure dissolving into quiet, panicked gasps. Jamal remained frozen, staring at the embossed deed on the mahogany table as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. He could not comprehend that his entire kingdom was built on paper pillars I owned. But before the absolute weight of his financial ruin could fully crush his ego, my mother intervened. Vivian was never one to let reality compromise her favorite narrative. She slammed her palms flat against the edge of the table. The sudden force rattled the fine china and caused a crystal goblet to topple over. Dark red wine spilled across the pristine white lace tablecloth, pooling like fresh blood toward the center floral arrangement. Vivian ignored the mess entirely. She pushed her chair back, the wooden legs scraping harshly against the polished hardwood floor, and stood up to her full imposing height. She marched directly around the table, placing herself physically between me and Jamal. It was a fiercely protective stance, the exact same posture she had adopted every time Jamal failed a class, wrecked a car, or squandered a major opportunity during our childhood. "How dare you come into this house and speak to your brother this way?" Vivian hissed, her voice vibrating with a terrifying, self-righteous fury. Her perfectly styled hair trembled as she pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "You are a spiteful, bitter woman, Kendra. You orchestrated this entire spectacle just to tear down a man who has worked his entire life to uphold the prestige of this family." "I did not orchestrate his bankruptcy, Mother," I replied, my voice completely level and steady. "I did not force him to stop paying his mortgage. I simply purchased a portfolio of distressed commercial and residential assets. Jamal put himself in this position. He is a grown man failing to meet his basic financial obligations." Vivian slapped her hand against the back of Jamal's chair, treating him like a fragile monument that needed defending. "He is the male heir of this family," she shouted, her voice echoing into the vaulted ceilings of the dining room. "He is the absolute pride of our community. Do you have any idea what it takes for a black man to build a logistics firm in this city? Do you know the immense pressure he is under to maintain our family name at the country club, at the church, and in our elite social circles? He carries a heavy burden you could never possibly understand. He deserves our absolute protection and unwavering respect, not public humiliation, from a sister who has lost her mind." Her words were steeped in decades of toxic traditionalism. Vivian had spent her entire life worshiping the men in our family, while demanding that the women shrink themselves to make those men look taller. I glanced over at my father, Harrison, who remained completely silent at the head of the table. He stared at his plate, allowing his wife to enforce the patriarchal rules of the house so his own hands could remain clean. "You have always been completely unnatural, Kendra." Vivian continued, stepping closer to me. The heavy scent of her expensive floral perfume washed over me, thick and suffocating. "You were always too sharp, too aggressive, and entirely unfeminine. When your husband died, you should have humbled yourself. You should have focused on raising your son quietly and letting the men in this family guide your future. Instead, you locked yourself away to build some ruthless technology business just to prove you did not need us. You abandoned your role as a mother to chase money you had no business managing. You have turned yourself into a hard, unlovable woman." "I never abandoned my son," I stated coldly, refusing to let her weaponize my motherhood against me. "I secured Leo's future permanently. I built an empire that ensures he will never have to beg for a seat at anyone else's table. I generated $600 million while raising my child single-handedly in the exact same house where my husband passed away. That is not unnatural, Vivian. That is extraordinary." "Extraordinary," Vivian scoffed, her face twisting into a mask of pure disgust. "There is nothing extraordinary about emasculating your own brother in front of his wife." She gestured wildly toward Lauren, who was now weeping openly into a linen napkin, her shoulders shaking with dramatic distress. "Look at what you are doing to this marriage." Lauren comes from a highly respectable family. She expects a certain standard of living, a certain level of dignity and grace. Jamal provides that for her. Jamal is a provider. And you walk in here on Christmas Day, waving a legal document around, deliberately trying to strip him of his manhood. You want him to look weak because you are deeply jealous that he has a complete traditional family, while you are raising a fatherless boy entirely alone. The sheer cruelty of her words hung in the air, deliberately designed to strike at my deepest vulnerabilities. Vivian wanted me to break. She wanted me to cry, to apologize, to shrink back into the compliant, subservient daughter she had always demanded I be. She wanted me to fold under the weight of her maternal disappointment and beg for her forgiveness. But the woman she was trying to intimidate no longer existed. The intense fire that had forged my company had burned away my desperate need for her validation a very long time ago. I looked from Vivian to Jamal. Jamal was staring at the floor, letting our mother fight his battles just as he had done since we were children. He was perfectly content to hide behind her skirts rather than face the reality of his own failures. I turned my unyielding gaze back to my mother. "You are defending an illusion," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying calm that commanded the attention of the entire room. "You are standing in a house you do not own, eating food bought on credit, defending a man who is 3 months away from total foreclosure. Jamal is not a provider. He is a fraud. He has been drowning in debt for years, desperately trying to project an image of extreme wealth just to keep Lauren happy and to satisfy your obsessive need for high society status. He is not carrying the family legacy. He is actively bankrupting it." Vivian's chest heaved rapidly. She was running out of emotional ammunition, but her absolute refusal to accept defeat drove her to terrifying new extremes. She grabbed the edge of the dining table, leaning toward me until we were inches apart. Her eyes were wide, completely devoid of any maternal warmth, filled only with the cold, calculating instinct of self-preservation. She was cornered, and like any predator, she decided to go on the offensive. "You are going to fix this right now," Vivian commanded, her voice dropping into a harsh, authoritative register that demanded absolute obedience. "I do not care how many millions of dollars you have sitting in your offshore bank accounts. I do not care what corporate title you bought for yourself. You are going to sign the deed to this property over to Jamal right here tonight." I stared at her, genuinely astounded by the sheer magnitude of her delusion. "You want me to hand him a $3 million estate for free?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. "You want me to absorb his massive financial failures as a reward for him insulting me all evening?" "It is the absolute least you can do," Vivian sneered, slamming her hand against the table one final time for emphasis. "You owe this family for the embarrassment you caused us when you refused to follow our guidance 4 years ago. You will transfer the title of this estate into Jamal's name immediately. You will clear his debt, and you will apologize to Lauren for causing her this unnecessary distress. You are going to walk out of this house and leave your brother's dignity completely intact. Because if you refuse to obey me, Kendra, you will regret it for the rest of your miserable life. The heavy silence in the dining room stretched out thick and suffocating. My mother stood completely rigid, her chest heaving as she glared down at me. She truly believed her ultimatum would snap me back into the obedient, subservient role she had designated for me since childhood. She expected me to lower my eyes, apologize for my arrogance, and immediately submit to her authority. Instead, I picked up my coffee cup, took a slow, deliberate sip, and placed it gently back onto its matching saucer. The porcelain clinked sharply against the quiet of the room. You want me to sign over a $3 million estate to a man who just threatened to throw me out into the street? I asked, my voice completely devoid of the panic she desperately wanted to see. You want me to reward his absolute financial incompetence just to protect your fragile social standing at the country club. Vivian slammed her open palm against the mahogany table again. Her diamond rings cracked loudly against the wood. You are going to pull a pen out of your designer bag right now, and you are going to endorse that deed over to your brother, she commanded, her voice vibrating with a terrifying, righteous fury. You will call your asset management team first thing tomorrow morning and instruct them to execute the transfer. You will frame it as a generous Christmas gift. You will tell everyone in our social circle that you simply wanted to bless your brother and his wife for the holidays to honor the family name. You have more money than you could ever spend in a lifetime, Kendra. You do not need this house. Jamal needs this house. He is the male heir of this family, and you will not strip him of his dignity just to satisfy your bitter, unnatural ambition. I looked past my mother and locked eyes with Jamal. The golden child was standing a few feet away, his broad shoulders slumped slightly, his face a mask of wounded pride. He was 38 years old, a grown man who claimed to be a powerful corporate executive, yet he was hiding behind our mother's skirts while she fought his battles. He did not say a word to stop her. He did not interject to defend his own honor. He simply watched, a pathetic glimmer of hope sparking in his eyes, as he realized Vivian might actually bully me into saving him from his own ruin. Beside him, Lauren had stopped her theatrical weeping. She wiped her pale cheeks with a linen napkin and straightened her posture, her smug arrogance slowly returning as she watched her mother-in-law go to war for their fraudulent lifestyle. I am not transferring the deed, Vivian, I stated with absolute, unshakable finality. I am not gifting my brother a luxury estate to subsidize his failure. He took out a mortgage he could not afford to impress people who do not care about him. He defaulted on his payments because he is a terrible businessman. Those are his choices, and these are his consequences. The eviction stands. Vivian's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. The maternal facade she projected to the outside world completely dissolved, leaving only the ruthless, calculating matriarch who viewed her children purely as assets to be leveraged. She took a slow, deliberate step closer to me. She leaned over the table, pressing her perfectly manicured nails into the polished wood until her knuckles turned stark white. She lowered her voice into a dangerous, icy whisper designed to strike at the absolute core of my soul. If you refuse to do exactly as I say, Kendra, you will lose everything you just built. Vivian threatened, her words dripping with malice. You think you are untouchable because you sold your little tech company for a fortune. You think Apex Global Holdings will still want you associated with their pristine corporate brand when I expose the dark, filthy truth about how you funded your startup. I did not flinch, but I felt a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. She was crossing a line I never thought even she would dare to cross. I know the truth about David's death. Vivian continued, utilizing the name of my late husband as a weapon. I know exactly how you secured that $1 million life insurance payout so quickly. The dining room plunged into an absolute deathly stillness. The sheer cruelty of bringing up my dead husband, the father of the child sitting just a few feet away from us, was staggering. My father, Harrison, finally looked up from his plate, his eyes widening in sheer panic. He opened his mouth as if to stop her, but his legendary cowardice kept him firmly in his seat. He remained silent, allowing his wife to desecrate a dead man's memory just to secure their son's financial comfort. "You were a desperate, grieving widow," Vivian mocked, her eyes burning into mine. "But you were also incredibly greedy. You needed capital for your ridiculous data company. You rushed the insurance investigators. You pushed the paperwork through with suspicious speed. I will go to the media, Kendra. I will contact the board of directors at Apex Global Holdings tomorrow morning. I will tell them that the founder of their newest $600 million acquisition funded her entire empire with dirty money. I will tell them there were severe irregularities regarding the fatal car accident that killed your husband. I will suggest that you manipulated the investigation to guarantee a massive payout." She was entirely fabricating a vicious, slanderous lie, but she knew exactly how the corporate world operated. An ethics scandal of that magnitude, a public accusation of insurance fraud and potential foul play, brought forward by a CEO's own mother, would trigger an immediate corporate crisis. Apex Global Holdings was a publicly traded entity. They despised scandal. A formal investigation would freeze my assets, plunge my new wealth into years of brutal litigation, and permanently destroy my professional reputation in the technology sector. Vivian was threatening to burn my entire life to the ground. "You will sign the deed over to Jamal tonight," Vivian demanded, her voice rising in triumph, "or I will ruin your perfect new reputation before you even get the chance to enjoy it. I will make sure the world views you not as a brilliant entrepreneur, but as a cold-blooded, fraudulent widow who profited off her own husband's tragic death." She stood up straight, crossing her arms over her chest. A cold, victorious smile spread across her face. She looked down at me with absolute satisfaction, thoroughly convinced she had just delivered the ultimate checkmate. She believed she possessed the perfect leverage. She believed my love for David and my desperate need to protect his memory would force me into immediate submission. I watched the reactions ripple across the room. Jamal puffed his chest out once again, his arrogant swagger fully restored. He adjusted his silk tie, looking at me with a sickening sneer of triumph. Lauren let out a soft, delighted laugh, picking up her wine glass to take a celebratory sip. They truly believed they had won. They truly believed my mother had successfully cornered me into surrendering my property to fund their delusions of grandeur. I sat perfectly still, observing the sheer depravity of the people who called themselves my family. They were willing to desecrate my dead husband, destroy my career, and publicly brand me a criminal, all to ensure that Jamal did not have to face the consequences of his own financial incompetence. The absolute rot at the core of their existence was fully exposed under the bright light of the crystal chandelier. I did not feel fear. I did not feel the crushing weight of their blackmail. I only felt a cold, calculated readiness to strike back. Vivian smiled at me, waiting for me to reach into my designer bag and produce a pen to sign away my assets. She believed she held the ultimate trump card. She had absolutely no idea that she had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to execute her total destruction. Vivian stood tall at the edge of the dining table, waiting for me to shatter under the weight of her blackmail. She genuinely believed her threat was the ultimate killing blow. She thought the mere mention of David's death would reduce me to the trembling, heartbroken widow I was 4 years ago. She expected me to panic, to cry, to frantically reach into my bag for a pen to sign over my $3 million estate just to keep her quiet. I stared at the triumphant, malicious gleam in her eyes, feeling nothing but a chilling sense of absolute clarity. The silence in the dining room was so profound, I could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Jamal was breathing heavily, his eyes darting between me and our mother, waiting for his salvation. Lauren had stopped her theatrical weeping, watching me with wide, expectant eyes. I did not break eye contact with my mother as I reached down to the floor. I unclasped the gold hardware of my designer leather tote bag. The smooth sound of the zipper opening seemed to echo against the vaulted ceilings. I reached inside and grasped the thick, heavy stack of documents I had prepared specifically for this exact moment. I pulled the papers out and held them up in the light of the crystal chandelier. They were not simple printouts. They were certified, audited bank statements bound by thick clips stamped and verified by a team of elite forensic accountants. You think you are holding a dark secret over my head, Vivian, I said, my voice completely devoid of the hysteria she desperately wanted to provoke. You think you can march into my new corporate boardroom and spin a tale about how I manipulated an insurance investigation? You actually believe that threatening to weaponize the worst tragedy of my life will force me to hand over a luxury estate to a man who cannot even pay his own bills? I stepped away from my chair. I walked slowly to the center of the room, standing directly across from where my father Harrison sat paralyzed at the head of the table. I lifted the massive stack of bank statements and dropped them. I let the heavy pages scatter violently across the mahogany wood. They landed over the silver forks, sliding over the rim of the crystal water glasses, covering the fine china plates. The stark white paper with bold black numbers contrasted sharply against the dark red wine stains soaking into the lace tablecloth. The secret you think you hold is an absolute delusion, I stated, projecting my voice so it carried a lethal, undeniable weight. But the secret I hold is a federal crime. I turned my gaze slowly from Vivian to my father. Harrison flinched, shrinking back into his grand leather dining chair. Tell them, Harrison, I commanded, my tone leaving absolutely no room for escape. Tell your perfect wife and your golden son exactly what those documents are. My father swallowed hard. A thick bead of sweat rolled down his temple, catching the light. He refused to look at the papers scattered across his dinner plate. His hands trembled visibly as he gripped the carved armrests of his chair. He opened his mouth, but his legendary cowardice kept him completely mute. Since you have suddenly lost your voice, I will explain it to them. I continued pacing slowly behind my chair, taking total command of the room. 4 years ago, the police knocked on my door to tell me my husband's car had been struck by a drunk driver. The shock sent me into immediate severe premature labor. I was rushed to the hospital. I spent 3 weeks in the intensive care unit fighting for my life, while my newborn son fought for his inside a neonatal incubator. I looked at Jamal and Lauren, ensuring they understood the exact gravity of the timeline I was laying out. David left behind a comprehensive $1 million life insurance policy, I explained. It was intended to secure a stable future for me and Leo, because I was incapacitated, heavily medicated, and recovering from emergency surgery. My father generously stepped in to handle the initial legal paperwork. He told me he was protecting me from the stress of estate transfers. He told me I needed to rest and focus on my baby. I leaned across the table, resting my hands flat against the wood, bringing my face inches from Harrison's sweating brow. What he actually did was forge my signature on a power of attorney document. I said, my words striking like physical blows. He contacted the insurance agency. He routed the payout through a secondary trust before transferring the remaining balance to my primary account. He illegally diverted $600,000 of my husband's death benefits while his daughter was fighting for her life in a hospital bed. Vivian gasped loudly, clutching her pearl necklace as if she had been physically struck. That is a disgusting lie, she shrieked, her voice cracking with panic. Your father is a deacon in the church. He is a respected businessman. He guided you through the darkest period of your life, and this is how you repay him. You fabricate a vicious story about theft just to deflect from your own fraudulent behavior. Harrison, tell her she is lying. Tell her to pack up her fake documents and leave this house. Harrison remained utterly silent. He stared at the top document resting near his wine glass. It highlighted the exact routing numbers he had used to steal my future. I tapped the paper directly in front of my mother. Look at the routing numbers, Vivian, I instructed sharply. I did not fabricate these bank statements. I did not print them off a home computer to win an argument. These are certified forensic audits pulled directly from the Federal Banking Reserve. You both thought I was too broken by grief to ever notice the missing funds. You assumed the trauma of losing my husband and nearly losing my son had shattered my mind. You thought I was just a naive, overly emotional woman who would blindly accept whatever financial scraps you handed me. I stood up straight, letting my absolute authority fill the space. But you forgot who I am, I continued. You forgot that I analyze complex financial data algorithms for a living. You forgot that my entire career is built on tracking anomalies hidden deep inside encrypted systems. When I finally recovered and started building my cybersecurity firm, I audited my own personal finances to secure a business loan. I traced the insurance payout directly to the underwriter. I pulled the original deposit records. I followed the digital footprints your husband left behind because he was arrogant enough to believe a woman would never look at the math. I spent months compiling this evidence, ensuring that every single stolen cent was completely accounted for. Jamal stared at the scattered papers, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He reached out with a shaking hand and grabbed one of the statements. His eyes scanned the highlighted columns. I watched his expression shift from aggressive denial to sickening realization. Even with his limited understanding of corporate finance, the forensic trail was impossible to deny. The documents showed the exact date the funds were wired, the fake trust account created under a variation of my name, and the subsequent massive transfers out of that account directly into Harrison's private holding fund. "This cannot be real," Jamal muttered, his voice completely lacking its previous booming arrogance. "Dad, tell me this is not real. Tell me you did not forge her signature." Harrison finally looked up. His face was gray, the color completely drained from his cheeks. He looked at Jamal, then at Vivian, and finally at me. He opened his mouth, desperately searching for a defense, searching for a way to maintain the grand illusion of his patriarchal supremacy. "You committed felony wire fraud and grand larceny," I stated, driving the brutal reality of his actions into the room. "You stole from your widowed daughter and your newborn grandson. You stripped us of the financial security my husband worked his entire life to provide. And you did it while sitting beside my hospital bed, holding my hand and telling me everything was going to be okay." I turned my attention back to Vivian. She was now staring at her husband with wide, horrified eyes, the full weight of her failed blackmail crushing her. "So go ahead, Mother," I challenged, gesturing toward the front door. "Go to my corporate partners. Go to the media. Expose the dark secret of David's life insurance payout. Tell the entire world that your husband is a federal criminal who robbed his own grieving daughter. I am sure the country club will absolutely love that story. I am sure the church congregation will be thrilled to hear exactly how their esteemed deacon funds his lifestyle. Execute your threat, Vivian. Let us see who burns first." Vivian remained entirely paralyzed, the breath completely knocked out of her lungs. Her eyes darted from the damning documents scattered across the table to her husband, waiting for him to produce a miracle, a lie, a sudden burst of authority to save them. But Harrison only stared at his dinner plate, his face slick with a cold, terrified sweat. I did not give them a single moment to breathe. I reached out and slid a specific page from the thick stack directly across the polished wood, stopping it right in front of Jamal. I tapped my manicured fingernail against a column of highlighted transaction records. "Read the destination accounts, Jamal," I instructed, my voice cutting through the heavy silence of the dining room like a surgical blade. My father did not just steal David's life insurance to pad his own retirement fund. He did not donate it to the church building fund to secure his righteous, holy image in the community. He did not invest it in a conservative portfolio for safekeeping. He funneled every single stolen cent directly into a failing retail venture. I watched Jamal's eyes slowly scan the page. He frowned, his brow furrowing deeply as he read the name of the beneficiary account. He muttered the name aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "Lux Impressions, LLC." Lauren let out a sharp, strangled gasp. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her perfectly contoured cheeks looking hollow and ash gray. She shrank back into her velvet dining chair, her hands gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles turned white. She was suddenly desperate to become invisible. Jamal turned his head slowly, looking at his wife as if she were a total stranger. He looked back at the paper, then up at his father, the reality of the situation finally piercing through his thick, arrogant skull. "Your beautiful, sophisticated wife has been running a bankrupt vanity project for the last 4 years," I explained, keeping my gaze locked on Jamal. Her exclusive luxury boutique was hemorrhaging money from the moment she cut the ribbon. She was failing Jamal, and she was failing so spectacularly that it threatened to shatter the perfect elite facade you both work so desperately to project to your country club friends. She went crying to Harrison because she knew you were already drowning in debt from trying to maintain this massive house. She knew you could not save her business, so your father decided to play the ultimate patriarch. He took the money meant to feed, clothe, and educate his orphaned grandson, and he pumped it directly into a failing clothing store, just to keep his white daughter-in-law happy and to protect your fragile image. Jamal's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The golden child, the untouchable male heir, was suddenly confronted with the fact that his wife's much-publicized success as a female entrepreneur was entirely funded by the blood money of his dead brother-in-law. Lauren buried her face in her hands, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The illusion of her superiority was completely decimated. The sheer ugliness of the truth was too much for the patriarchal pride of the house. Harrison finally snapped. The silence shattered as he violently shoved his heavy wooden chair back and stood up to his full height. His face flushed a dangerous dark red, the veins in his neck bulging against his stiff white collar. He slammed both of his fists onto the table, shaking the remaining crystal glasses and sending another splash of dark wine across the lace cloth. "That is absolutely enough!" Harrison roared, his voice booming with the misplaced, furious authority of a man who genuinely believed he owned the world. "I am the head of this family. I make the financial decisions that ensure our collective survival. You have absolutely no right to sit there in my presence and judge how I distribute our resources. Our resources." I repeated, my voice dropping to a deadly icy calm. That was David's money. It was his final act of love and protection for me and for Leo. It was never yours to touch, let alone distribute. "It was $1 million, Kendra," Harrison shouted, spittle flying from his lips as his face contorted with aggressive indignation. He pointed a thick, trembling finger directly at my chest. "You were a hysterical, grieving widow. You were lying in a hospital bed attached to heart monitors, weeping uncontrollably over a dead husband and a premature baby. You were completely emotionally unstable. You were entirely incapable of managing a sum of money that large." He paced a few steps behind his chair, throwing his hands in the air, trying to validate his felony with twisted, deeply ingrained misogyny. "Men are equipped to handle complex finances," he declared loudly, looking at Jamal for validation that would not come. "Men possess the rational, emotional detachment required to protect generational wealth. If I had left that money in your hands, you would have squandered it on endless medical bills or given it away to charities in a bout of emotional distress. You lacked the vision to secure the family's future. I did exactly what a patriarch is supposed to do. I stepped in, I took control, and I managed the assets." I stared at the man who had raised me, feeling a profound, absolute disgust. He was not apologizing. He was not showing an ounce of remorse. He was loudly and aggressively justifying grand larceny because his gender gave him a divine right to steal from his own daughter. "Jamal and Lauren are the public face of this family," Harrison continued, his voice echoing off the crown molding. "Jamal runs a prominent business. He entertains wealthy clients. He networks with the elite of this city. His marriage to Lauren elevates our social status. Her boutique is a symbol of our success and our refinement. When her business hit a rough patch, it threatened everything we have built in this community. It threatened to make us look weak and incompetent. I made an executive decision to reallocate unused funds where they were desperately needed. I protected our image. I protected your brother from public humiliation. That is how successful families survive, Kendra. We protect the legacy at all costs." I listened to his deranged justification without blinking. "You protected an illusion, Harrison," Bob replied, ensuring my voice carried absolute authority. "You committed federal wire fraud and grand larceny to fund a sinking ship. You forged my signature and stole from a grieving widow because you view women as intellectually inferior and emotionally compromised. You genuinely believe your gender entitles you to commit crimes as long as you can justify it under the guise of family protection. But you did not protect this family. You only protected Jamal's ego." I took a slow, deliberate step closer to the table, looking directly into my father's terrified, angry eyes. And your grand executive decision was completely useless, I stated clearly. Lauren's boutique is still failing. Her profit margins are entirely negative. Jamal's logistics firm is barely staying afloat. They are 90 days past due on their mortgage. Your stolen money did not save them. It only delayed their inevitable catastrophic collapse. You risked federal prison to buy them a few more years of fake luxury and designer clothes. I looked down at the bank statements, then back up at my parents. And now the money is gone, I finalized. The boutique is practically bankrupt. The house belongs entirely to me. And the entire foundation of your patriarchal kingdom is sitting right there on the table, exposed as a massive, unforgivable fraud. So do not ever speak to me about emotional instability or financial incompetence again. I built a $600 million empire from scratch while raising a child. You destroyed your family to buy a purse. The silence that followed my declaration was absolute. The grand, opulent dining room, previously a stage for my family's arrogant performances, had transformed into a crime scene. I watched Lauren carefully. She sat frozen in her velvet chair, staring at the forensic bank statements resting inches from her plate. Her perfectly manicured hands hovered in the air, trembling violently. The reality of the situation was crashing down upon her. Her entire identity as a self-made entrepreneur, the glamorous narrative she peddled to her country club friends and her massive online audience was a complete fabrication. Lux Impressions was not a thriving luxury boutique. It was a financial black hole kept afloat by the stolen life insurance money of my dead husband. But Lauren did not feel remorse. She did not look at me with guilt for the staggering betrayal my father had committed on her behalf. Instead, I saw the exact moment her survival instincts kicked in. I saw the calculated shift in her pale blue eyes. When confronted with undeniable facts, Lauren instinctively reached for the only weapon she had ever needed to navigate the world. She reached for her fragility. Her breathing hitched. It started as a soft, rhythmic gasp, perfectly designed to draw the attention of every man in the room. Her chest began to heave, and she pressed her palms against her cheeks. A fresh wave of tears cascaded down her face, ruining her immaculate makeup. She let out a high-pitched, strangled sob that sounded like a wounded animal. It was a masterful performance honed by a lifetime of knowing that her distress would immediately command protection. Jamal reacted instantly, completely forgetting that his own father had just been exposed as a federal criminal. He rushed to his wife's side, dropping to his knees beside her chair. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close, glaring up at me with a ferocious, misplaced hatred. "Look at what you are doing to her, Kendra!" Jamal shouted, his voice thick with protective rage. "You are completely unhinged. You come into our home on Christmas Day and launch these aggressive, psychotic attacks against my wife. She has absolutely nothing to do with this. She is an innocent woman running a small business, and you are trying to destroy her out of pure, bitter jealousy." Lauren buried her face in Jamal's shoulder, sobbing louder. "I am so scared, Jamal," she wailed, her voice muffled against his suit jacket. "She is acting like a maniac. She has always hated me. She has always wanted to tear me down because I actually managed to build a beautiful life." I remained standing perfectly still, watching the absurd theatrical display unfold. "You are not a victim, Lauren," I said, my voice cutting through her manufactured hysteria with icy precision. "You are the direct beneficiary of grand larceny. Do not sit there and pretend you did not notice hundreds of thousands of dollars suddenly appearing in your failing business accounts. You happily spent my dead husband's money to buy your inventory, to pay your lease, and to fund your lavish lifestyle while I was learning how to be a single mother. Your tears do not work on me." Lauren's head snapped up. Her face was flushed, blotchy with red patches of fury and panic. The fragile damsel routine was failing to yield the desired result, so she seamlessly pivoted to a much darker, far more dangerous tactic. She pushed Jamal away and reached across the table, grabbing her smartphone. Her fingers flew across the screen, unlocking the device and opening her primary social media application. She held the phone up, the glowing screen reflecting against her tear-streaked face. You think you can just march in here and bully me? Lauren demanded, her voice shaking with a potent mixture of fear and absolute venom. You think you can use your new corporate money to intimidate my family? I have 400,000 followers on this platform, Kendra. 400,000 women who support my business and support me. They know my heart. They know how hard I work. And they are going to know exactly who you are in about 10 seconds. Vivian stepped forward, suddenly panicked by the introduction of a live audience. Lauren put the phone down. My mother urged, her voice tight with anxiety. We do not need to broadcast this to the public. We handle family business behind closed doors. But Lauren was completely beyond reason. She was cornered, humiliated, and desperate to regain control of the narrative. She ignored Vivian entirely, keeping her phone pointed directly at my face. Her thumb hovered over the button to start a live broadcast. I am going to press this button, Lauren threatened, her voice dropping into a breathless, dramatic whisper, perfectly calibrated for her audience. And I am going to tell every single one of my followers that I am sitting in my own dining room, terrified for my physical safety. I will tell them that my unstable, aggressive sister-in-law broke into my home and is trying to physically intimidate me. I will tell them that you are a threatening, hostile woman who is using fabricated financial documents to extort my family and destroy a female-owned small business. She locked eyes with me, a vicious, triumphant smirk breaking through her tears. How do you think the world will react, Kendra? How do you think the media will respond when a crying, terrified mother goes live, begging for help because an angry, aggressive Black woman is threatening her in her own home? You know exactly what happens when someone like me asks for help against someone like you. Your corporate board members will be watching. The police will be watching. I will ruin your entire life with one single broadcast. I will make sure everyone sees you as the violent, unhinged monster you truly are. The sheer racial venom embedded in her threat was staggering. Lauren knew exactly the kind of dangerous, explosive stereotype she was invoking. She was deliberately weaponizing her white tears and her social standing to paint me as an inherent physical threat, knowing historically and culturally how swiftly society rushes to protect a weeping white woman from a confident Black one. She was ready to trigger a modern-day digital lynch mob to cover up a federal crime. Jamal stood up, backing away from his wife slightly. Even he looked uncomfortable with the dangerous line she had just crossed, but his cowardice kept him silent. He simply watched, hoping Lauren's toxic strategy would somehow save them from the financial abyss. I looked at the glowing lens of her smartphone camera. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I did not give her a single ounce of the aggressive reaction she so desperately wanted to capture on film. Instead, I slowly reached into my bag and pulled out my own phone. I placed it gently on the table next to the audited bank statements. Please, Lauren, I said, my voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. I highly encourage you to press that button. Go live. Bring all 400,000 of your followers right into this dining room. But before you introduce me as the aggressive monster terrorizing your family, you need to make sure you get the camera angle just right. I pointed to the documents scattered across the lace tablecloth. Make sure you zoom in directly on the routing numbers, Lauren. Make sure your loyal followers get a crystal clear view of the forensic audit proving that your luxury boutique was entirely funded by the stolen life insurance policy of a dead man. Make sure they see the exact dates your father-in-law forged my signature. Make sure they understand that their favorite small business owner is currently in possession of hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen federal funds. Lauren's thumb hesitated. Her hand began to shake uncontrollably, the phone trembling in her grip. You want to play the victim? I continued, stepping closer to the table, my presence dominating the room. You want to weaponize your tears and invoke racist stereotypes to protect your fake lifestyle. Go ahead. Because the moment you go live, I will call the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service. I will hand them these exact documents. I will report Harrison for grand larceny and wire fraud, and I will report you and Lux Impressions, LLC, for receiving stolen property and money laundering. I leaned in, ensuring my words stripped away every last ounce of her delusional confidence. Your followers will not be sending you sympathy, Lauren. They will be watching the federal authorities seize your boutique, freeze your assets, and place you in handcuffs. They will watch you go to federal prison. So please, if you truly want to make this public, press the button. I am ready. I am. The color completely vanished from Lauren's face. The malicious gleam in her eyes was entirely extinguished, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. She looked down at the bank statements, the reality of her criminal exposure finally overriding her victim complex. She slowly lowered her phone, her chest heaving as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. The ultimate weapon she had relied on her entire life had just been completely disarmed. Vivian remained entirely paralyzed, the breath completely knocked out of her lungs. Her eyes darted from the damning documents scattered across the table to her husband, waiting for him to produce a miracle, a lie, a sudden burst of authority to save them. But Harrison only stared at his dinner plate, his face slick with a cold, terrified sweat. I did not give them a single moment to breathe. I reached out and slid a specific page from the thick stack directly across the polished wood, stopping it right in front of Jamal. I tapped my manicured fingernail against a column of highlighted transaction records. Read the destination accounts, Jamal, I instructed, my voice, cutting through the heavy silence of the dining room like a surgical blade. My father did not just steal David's life insurance to pad his own retirement fund. He did not donate it to the church building fund to secure his righteous, holy image in the community. He did not invest it in a conservative portfolio for safekeeping. He funneled every single stolen cent directly into a failing retail venture. I watched Jamal's eyes slowly scan the page. He frowned, his brow furrowing deeply as he read the name of the beneficiary account. He muttered the name aloud, his voice barely a whisper. Lux Impressions, LLC. Lauren let out a sharp, strangled gasp. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her perfectly contoured cheeks looking hollow and ash gray. She shrank back into her velvet dining chair, her hands gripping the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned white. She was suddenly desperate to become invisible. Jamal turned his head slowly, looking at his wife, as if she were a total stranger. He looked back at the paper, then up at his father, the reality of the situation finally piercing through his thick, arrogant skull. Your beautiful, sophisticated wife has been running a bankrupt vanity project for the last 4 years, I explained, keeping my gaze locked on Jamal. Her exclusive luxury boutique was hemorrhaging money from the moment she cut the ribbon. She was failing Jamal. And she was failing so spectacularly that it threatened to shatter the perfect elite facade you both work so desperately to project to your country club friends. She went crying to Harrison because she knew you were already drowning in debt from trying to maintain this massive house. She knew you could not save her business. So your father decided to play the ultimate patriarch. He took the money meant to feed, clothe, and educate his orphaned grandson, and he pumped it directly into a failing clothing store just to keep his white daughter-in-law happy and to protect your fragile image. Jamal's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The golden child, the untouchable male heir, was suddenly confronted with the fact that his wife's much-publicized success as a female entrepreneur was entirely funded by the blood money of his dead brother-in-law. Lauren buried her face in her hands, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The illusion of her superiority was completely decimated. The sheer ugliness of the truth was too much for the patriarchal pride of the house. Harrison finally snapped. The silence shattered as he violently shoved his heavy wooden chair back and stood up to his full height. His face flushed a dangerous dark red, the veins in his neck bulging against his stiff white collar. He slammed both of his fists onto the table, shaking the remaining crystal glasses and sending another splash of dark wine across the lace cloth. That is absolutely enough, Harrison roared, his voice booming with the misplaced, furious authority of a man who genuinely believed he owned the world. I am the head of this family. I make the financial decisions that ensure our collective survival. You have absolutely no right to sit there in my presence and judge how I distribute our resources. Our resources, I repeated, my voice dropping to a deadly, icy calm. That was David's money. It was his final act of love and protection for me and for Leo. It was never yours to touch, let alone distribute. "It was $1 million!" Kendra Harrison shouted, spittle flying from his lips, as his face contorted with aggressive indignation. He pointed a thick, trembling finger directly at my chest. "You are a hysterical, grieving widow. You were lying in a hospital bed attached to heart monitors, weeping uncontrollably over a dead husband and a premature baby. You were completely emotionally unstable. You were entirely incapable of managing a sum of money that large." He paced a few steps behind his chair, throwing his hands in the air, trying to validate his felony with twisted, deeply ingrained misogyny. "Men are equipped to handle complex finances," he declared loudly, looking at Jamal for validation that would not come. "Men possess the rational emotional detachment required to protect generational wealth. If I had left that money in your hands, you would have squandered it on endless medical bills, or given it away to charities in a bout of emotional distress. You lacked the vision to secure the family's future. I did exactly what a patriarch is supposed to do. I stepped in, I took control, and I managed the assets." I stared at the man who had raised me, feeling a profound, absolute disgust. He was not apologizing. He was not showing an ounce of remorse. He was loudly and aggressively justifying grand larceny because his gender gave him a divine right to steal from his own daughter. "Jamal and Lauren are the public face of this family," Harrison continued, his voice echoing off the crown molding. "Jamal runs a prominent business. He entertains wealthy clients. He networks with the elite of this city. His marriage to Lauren elevates our social status. Her boutique is a symbol of our success and our refinement. When her business hit a rough patch, it threatened everything we have built in this community. It threatened to make us look weak and incompetent. I made an executive decision to reallocate unused funds where they were desperately needed. I protected our image. I protected your brother from public humiliation. That is how successful families survive, Kendra. We protect the legacy at all costs." I listened to his deranged justification without blinking. "You protected an illusion, Harrison," I replied, ensuring my voice carried absolute authority. "You committed federal wire fraud and grand larceny to fund a sinking ship. You forged my signature and stole from a grieving widow because you view women as intellectually inferior and emotionally compromised. You genuinely believe your gender entitles you to commit crimes as long as you can justify it under the guise of family protection. But you did not protect this family. You only protected Jamal's ego." I took a slow, deliberate step closer to the table, looking directly into my father's terrified, angry eyes. "And your grand executive decision was completely useless," I stated clearly. "Lauren's boutique is still failing. Her profit margins are entirely negative. Jamal's logistics firm is barely staying afloat. They are 90 days past due on their mortgage. Your stolen money did not save them. It only delayed their inevitable catastrophic collapse. You risked federal prison to buy them a few more years of fake luxury and designer clothes." I looked down at the bank statements, then back up at my parents. "And now the money is gone," I finalized. "The boutique is practically bankrupt. The house belongs entirely to me. And the entire foundation of your patriarchal kingdom is sitting right there on the table, exposed as a massive, unforgivable fraud. So do not ever speak to me about emotional instability or financial incompetence again. I built a $600 million empire from scratch while raising a child. You destroyed your family to buy a purse." Lauren's thumb hovered over the record button, her hand shaking so violently that the phone slipped against her manicured fingers. The initial wave of terror had hit her, but her desperate, deeply ingrained entitlement fought back. She gripped the device with both hands, lifting it higher, trying to resurrect her shattered bravado. She genuinely believed her digital army of 400,000 followers was an impenetrable shield. She thought the screen of her phone could magically alter reality, turning her complicity in a felony into a story of unwarranted persecution. She glared at me, her chest heaving, convinced that if she could just frame the narrative first, she could somehow win. "You are bluffing!" Lauren spat, her voice shrill and wavering. "You would not dare bring the federal authorities into this. It would ruin your own family name. It would drag your precious new corporate brand through the mud. My followers will ruin you before a single investigator even looks at those papers. I am pressing the button, Kendra. I am doing it right now. A short, humorless laugh escaped my lips. The sound echoed in the cavernous dining room, sharp and completely devoid of warmth. I did not move to stop her. I did not reach for her phone. I simply crossed my arms over my chest and looked at her with a mixture of profound pity and absolute clinical detachment. "You really have absolutely no idea what I do for a living, Lauren," I said, my voice resonating with lethal calm. You hear the words $600 million company, and your mind immediately jumps to the kind of vanity metrics you care about. You think about influencer sponsorships, brand deals, and social media engagement. You think my business operates on the same superficial popularity-driven level as your failing luxury boutique. You genuinely believe that an unsecured smartphone and a ring light give you power. I took a slow step around the table, placing myself directly in her line of sight. "I want you to listen to me very carefully," I instructed, holding her panicked gaze. "My company specializes in elite cybersecurity and digital forensics. We do not sell clothes. We do not sell lifestyle aesthetics. We build encrypted infrastructure for global financial institutions. We trace digital anomalies across international borders. We work directly with government agencies to dismantle shell companies, track illicit wire transfers, and expose high-level corporate fraud. My entire life, my entire empire is built on uncovering the exact type of pathetic, amateurish financial crimes your father-in-law just committed on your behalf." Lauren swallowed hard, her grip on the phone loosening slightly as the reality of my words began to penetrate her panic. "You are standing in a dining room, holding a consumer-grade mobile device, threatening to launch a social media smear campaign against a woman who commands an army of the most sophisticated digital forensic analysts on the planet." I continued, letting the sheer absurdity of her threat settle over the room. "Do you have any idea how easy it was for me to find your hidden accounts? Do you know how laughable Harrison's attempt to launder my husband's life insurance money was? He routed it through a secondary trust and funneled it into Lux Impressions LLC, using his primary IP address. He left a digital footprint so wide and so obvious that a first-year analyst at my firm could have uncovered the entire conspiracy during their lunch break." I tapped the stack of certified bank statements resting on the mahogany wood. "Every single transaction has already been mapped, categorized, and secured on offline servers," I stated. "We have the metadata, we have the timestamps, we have the encrypted communication logs between Harrison's private accounts and your business accounts. My team compiled this dossier not just to win a family argument, but to ensure that if I ever needed to hand it over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the case would be completely airtight." Jamal closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the velvet chair as the inescapable truth of their doom washed over him. He was completely out of his depth, a foolish man who had blindly accepted stolen money to maintain the illusion of his patriarchal success. "So please, Lauren," I challenged, gesturing openly toward her phone, "press record. Invite your 400,000 followers into this dining room. Let them see you crying and playing the victim. But understand exactly what will happen the second that live stream ends. The internet is forever, but social media outrage has a lifespan of about 24 hours. Federal indictments, however, are permanent." I leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the table, closing the distance between us. "The moment you broadcast my face and attempt to frame me as the aggressor, I will release the complete, unredacted financial audit of Lux Impressions to the public, I promised. I will post the exact routing numbers. I will show your loyal followers the exact dates the deposits were made. I will let them see that while I was in the intensive care unit fighting to keep my premature baby alive, you and Harrison were transferring David's death benefits to pay for your designer inventory and your country club membership." Lauren let out a sharp gasp, stepping back as if I had physically struck her. "How long do you think your followers will defend you when they see the math?" I asked, my tone relentless. "How long will your carefully curated image as a successful self-made female founder survive when the entire world realizes your business is entirely funded by a dead man's life insurance? Your brand will not just be canceled, Lauren, it will be legally dismantled. The public will despise you, but the Internal Revenue Service will investigate you. They will freeze your business accounts. They will seize your inventory as assets purchased with stolen funds. They will audit every single tax return you and Jamal have filed for the last 4 years. Lauren's lower lip trembled. The phone in her hand was no longer a weapon. It was a massive liability. She looked at the screen, staring at her own tear-streaked reflection, finally comprehending that pressing that button would be the equivalent of detonating a bomb inside her own life. "You think you can weaponize your tears against me?" I continued, exposing the ugly racist undercurrent of her threat. "You think the world will rush to save the weeping white woman from the successful black woman? You were banking on that specific prejudice to protect you. But prejudice cannot protect you from forensic accounting. Tears do not erase wire fraud. A social media broadcast will not stop a federal prosecutor from examining the fake trust account Harrison created to launder my money." I stood up straight, commanding the room with absolute authority. "Press the button, Lauren," I demanded, my voice ringing with lethal certainty. "Invite the public in. Let us show them exactly who the real monster in this room is. Show them the father who stole from his widowed daughter. Show them the son who was too weak to provide for his own wife, so he let his father commit a felony to keep up appearances. And show them the woman who happily spent blood money to pretend she was a success. Do it." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly, marking the seconds as Lauren's entire world collapsed. Her hand slowly dropped. Her fingers uncurled and the phone slid from her grasp, clattering loudly against the polished mahogany table. She collapsed into her chair, bringing her knees together, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to shrink into nothingness. The hysterical sobs abruptly stopped, replaced by a hollow, defeated silence. Jamal stared at the phone resting on the table, his face devoid of all color. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a newfound terrifying realization. He finally understood that I was not the grieving, broken girl they had manipulated 4 years ago. I was the architect of their destruction, and I held every single string. "You do not have a business, Lauren," I finalized, letting the absolute truth settle over the ruined dinner. "You do not have an empire. You have a crime scene. And right now, the only reason you and Harrison are not sitting in a federal holding cell is because I have not decided if I want to make that phone call yet. You belong entirely to me." I turned my gaze away from the shattered couple and looked directly at my father. Harrison was still paralyzed at the head of the table, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. He had watched his entire patriarchal kingdom, his golden son, and his polished daughter-in-law get systematically dismantled in a matter of minutes. The illusion of his supremacy was dead buried under the undeniable weight of his own arrogance and my digital forensics. The room belonged to me now. Lauren's phone lay dead on the mahogany table, a useless piece of metal and glass stripped of its power. The dining room was suffocatingly quiet, filled only with the ragged, shallow breathing of a family watching their empire burn to ash. Harrison remained slumped in his chair, defeated by his own greed. Vivian clutched her pearl necklace, her eyes darting frantically as she processed the reality of a federal indictment hovering over her household. Jamal knelt beside his wife, his hands hovering awkwardly over her trembling shoulders, still trying to play the role of the protective patriarch. I looked down at the paper documents I had thrown across the table. They were devastating, but they were only the beginning. My father's theft of my husband's life insurance was a blunt, arrogant crime committed by a man who believed he was untouchable. It was sloppy. But as I had dug through the digital footprints left behind by Harrison's transfers, I had inevitably stumbled across the broader financial network connecting this entire family. When you open a compromised door in a digital ecosystem, you see everything hiding in the shadows. I stepped away from the dining table and walked slowly toward the arched entryway of the adjoining living room. The space was dominated by a massive 80-inch smart television mounted above the marble fireplace. I pulled my own phone from my pocket. I unlocked the screen, bypassed 2 layers of biometric security, and opened the encrypted application my team had built specifically for this investigation. "You all seem to believe that Lauren is just a victim of bad business management," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the hardwood floors. "You think she is simply a naive boutique owner who got in over her head and needed her father-in-law to bail her out. You think the worst thing she has done is silently accept stolen money to buy designer clothes and maintain a country club membership. I swiped my finger upward across my phone screen. The massive television above the fireplace instantly flared to life. The sudden burst of harsh blue light illuminated the dark living room, casting long, sharp shadows across the antique furniture. But Lauren is far more calculating than any of you realize, I continued. She is not a victim. She is a predator. Jamal slowly got to his feet, leaving Lauren crumpled in her chair. He walked toward the living room, his eyes fixed on the glowing screen. The display showed a complex, highly detailed financial dashboard. It was not a static spreadsheet. It was a dynamic living map of digital transactions color-coded and meticulously organized by my elite forensic analysts. "What is this?" Kendra Jamal demanded, his voice lacking all of its usual booming arrogance. His tone was hollow, laced with a creeping sense of dread. "This is the internal ledger for your logistics firm, Jamal," I answered, tapping my screen to enlarge a specific graph. "This is the company you boast about at every family dinner. The company Harrison constantly praises as the crown jewel of the family legacy. According to your public filings, revenue has been steadily declining for the past 2 years. You have blamed it on supply chain issues. You have blamed it on market downturns. You have laid off 20% of your workforce, claiming economic hardship." Jamal swallowed hard, his throat working visibly. "The logistics market is volatile," he muttered defensively, though he could not tear his eyes away from the screen. "The market is fine, Jamal," I corrected sharply. "Your company is not bleeding because of the economy. Your company is bleeding because someone has severed a major artery and is quietly draining you dry." I tapped my phone again. The screen zoomed in on a specific column of outgoing payments. They were listed under a category labeled as external consulting and operational logistics. The payments were consistent, massive, and entirely fabricated. "Look at the vendors you are paying every single month," I instructed. Jamal squinted at the screen. He read the names aloud, his confusion deepening. "Apex Solutions, Vanguard Consulting, Horizon Logistics. I do not know these vendors. My chief financial officer handles these accounts." "Your wife handles these accounts," I stated, dropping the final veil. "She demanded access to your company's financial infrastructure 3 years ago, claiming she wanted to help you streamline your accounting. You thought it was a sweet gesture from a supportive partner. You handed her the administrative passwords because you were too arrogant and too lazy to manage your own books." Lauren let out a sharp, panicked sound from the dining room, like a trapped animal realizing the cage was fully locked. She stumbled to her feet, grabbing the edge of the table to steady herself. "Turn that off, Kendra," she screamed, her voice cracking with pure desperation. "You have no right to look at private business records. Turn it off right now." I ignored her completely, keeping my focus locked on my brother. "These vendors do not exist, Jamal," I explained, my voice relentless. "They are ghost companies. They are hollow corporate shells registered to a series of post office boxes in Delaware and Nevada. They provide absolutely zero services to your logistics firm. They do not ship freight. They do not offer consulting. They exist for one singular purpose. They exist to receive automated wire transfers from your corporate accounts." Jamal shook his head, taking a step closer to the television. He reached out his hand, hovering inches from the glowing numbers tracing the outflow of cash. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions over the course of 3 years. "Where is the money going?" he asked, his voice breaking. I swiped my screen for the final time. The television display shifted from the ledgers to a global map. Red lines arched from the dummy corporations in the United States directly across the ocean, landing squarely in the Caribbean and Europe. "It goes offshore," I answered. "It gets routed through the Delaware shell companies to sanitize the trail, and then it is immediately wired into 3 separate, highly encrypted accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland." I tapped the screen, and the beneficiary names for the offshore accounts appeared in bold, undeniable text. They were not registered to Jamal's company. They were registered to Lauren. Jamal stumbled backward, physically recoiling as if the television had struck him. He looked at the offshore balances. The numbers were staggering. While he was lying awake at night stressing over unpaid mortgages and failing profit margins, his wife was quietly stockpiling millions of dollars in untraceable foreign banks. "She has been embezzling from you since the day you gave her access to your ledgers," I said, making sure every word echoed through the silent house. She knew her boutique was a massive failure. She knew the money Harrison stole from me would eventually run out. She realized that your logistics firm was the only real asset left in this entire fraudulent family, and she decided to extract every last drop of value before the ship completely sank. "Why?" Jamal whispered, spinning around to face his wife. "Why would you do this? We are married. This is our money." "Because she is not planning to stay married to you, Jamal," I answered for her. I pulled up one final document on the screen. It was not a bank statement. It was an email correspondence intercepted by my team during the deep dive into Lauren's encrypted servers. The emails were addressed to one of the most ruthless, high-powered divorce attorneys in the state. "Read the emails," I commanded. "She retained legal counsel 6 months ago. She paid his retainer using the money she embezzled from your company. She has been meticulously preparing a blindside divorce. She drained your corporate accounts so that when she files the papers, your business will look utterly bankrupt on paper. You will be left with a failing company, a massive mortgage in default, and the absolute humiliation of a public collapse. Meanwhile, she will walk away playing the tragic victim of a failed businessman, comfortably sitting on millions of dollars, safely hidden offshore." The silence that descended upon the room was absolute. Harrison and Vivian stared at Lauren with unmasked horror. The perfect daughter-in-law, the shining symbol of their social status, was exposed as a parasite who had methodically gutted their golden son. Jamal walked slowly from the living room back into the dining room. He stopped inches from Lauren. His chest heaved. The arrogance, the entitled superiority he had carried his entire life was entirely gone. He looked at the woman he had worshipped, the woman he had defended just minutes ago, and saw a complete stranger. "Is it true?" Jamal demanded, his voice shaking with a dangerous, quiet rage. "Did you steal from my company? Were you planning to leave me bankrupt?" Lauren looked at her husband. She looked at the massive television screen broadcasting her crimes. She looked at Harrison and Vivian, who were shrinking away from her in disgust. She realized that her tears would not save her. She realized that the fragile, innocent victim routine was completely dead. The digital proof was irrefutable. The mask finally slipped. Lauren straightened her posture. The trembling stopped. She wiped the ruined mascara from her cheeks with the back of her hand and let out a cold, sharp laugh. Her pale blue eyes hardened into chips of ice. She did not look scared anymore. She looked vicious. "Yes, Jamal," she spat, her voice dripping with absolute contempt. "I took the money. I took every single cent I could quietly extract from your pathetic, mismanaged company." Vivian gasped, clutching her chest. "How could you?" she cried out. "We welcomed you into this family. We treated you like a daughter. You treated me like an accessory," Lauren fired back, turning her venom on my mother. "You wanted a pretty blonde wife for your son to show off at your ridiculous country club dinners. You wanted me to smile and play the perfect host while this entire family slowly went broke trying to maintain an illusion." She turned back to Jamal, pointing a finger directly at his face. "Your company is a joke, Jamal. You are a terrible businessman. You spend more time playing golf and buying expensive cars than actually managing your logistics routes. I saw the writing on the wall 3 years ago. I saw that you were going to drive us straight into bankruptcy just to keep up appearances with your friends. Did you really think I was going to let you drag me down with you? Did you actually believe I was going to stay married to a man who could not even afford the mortgage on this house without Daddy writing a check?" Jamal flinched as if he had been slapped. "You used me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I secured my future," Lauren corrected coldly. "I took what I needed to ensure that when this house of cards finally collapsed, I would not be left holding the debt. I deserve that money for having to put up with your fragile ego and your father's insufferable, pompous lectures. You are weak, Jamal. You are a weak, incompetent man who relies on everyone else to clean up your messes. I was just taking out my severance package before the final crash." The sheer brutality of her confession left the family completely paralyzed. Harrison stared at his son, watching the patriarchal dynasty he had sacrificed my future to protect shatter into pieces. Vivian covered her face, weeping softly into her hands as the perfect image she valued above all else was destroyed. Jamal stood perfectly still, his entire worldview completely annihilated by the woman he had chosen over his own sister. I stood by the arched entryway, observing the absolute carnage. The toxic foundation of their lives had been violently uprooted and dragged into the light. They had spent years tearing me down, stealing from me, and assuming I would quietly fade into the background. They had protected a criminal and worshipped a parasite, all in the name of image and ego. And now, armed with nothing but the truth and digital forensics, I had forced them to watch their kingdom burn. The flames of reality had completely engulfed the room, but my brother refused to feel the heat. Jamal stood trembling in front of the massive television screen, his eyes darting frantically over the offshore account balances. His mind simply could not process the magnitude of Lauren's betrayal. His entire existence had been carefully insulated by my parents, padded with unearned praise, and protected from any actual consequences. Confronted with the undeniable truth of his absolute ruin, Jamal instinctively retreated into the only defense mechanism he possessed. He chose delusion. "This is just a misunderstanding," Jamal stammered, his voice thin and reedy. He turned his back to the television and took a desperate step toward Lauren. His hands reached out, palms upturned, begging her to supply the lie he so desperately needed to hear. "You were just moving the capital to protect it, right? You were securing our assets against the upcoming corporate tax audits. You did not steal from me, Lauren. You were acting as my financial proxy. You were securing our family legacy." He was practically hyperventilating, his eyes wide and pleading. "Tell them," Lauren, Jamal urged, his voice cracking with panic. "Tell my sister and my parents that you set up those Cayman accounts for our future. Tell them this is just a complex logistical strategy." Lauren did not offer him a lifeline. She did not even attempt to soften the blow. She looked at her husband with an expression of profound, unadulterated disgust. Her upper lip curled into a sneer, laying bare the absolute contempt she had harbored for him all along. "There is no our future, Jamal," Lauren stated, her voice sharp and brittle like shattering glass. "I set up those accounts for me. I drained your company because you are a sinking ship, and I refuse to drown with a man who needs his father to pay his mortgage. You are exactly like Harrison. You project power to your country club friends, but behind closed doors, you are hollow, weak, and entirely incompetent." I took the money as my severance package. Jamal physically recoiled, staggering backward as if she had driven a knife into his chest. His broad shoulders slumped, the expensive fabric of his tailored suit suddenly hanging off him like a cheap costume. The golden boy, the untouchable male heir who had happily thrived on my stolen inheritance, was finally forced to look at his own reflection. He was bankrupt. He was betrayed. He was a public embarrassment, standing in the ruins of his own home. He dropped his gaze to the floor, his chest heaving with silent, humiliating sobs. From the head of the table, Harrison and Vivian watched the destruction of their perfect son. For 30 years, they had poured every resource, every ounce of affection, and every stolen dollar into Jamal. He was their ultimate retirement plan, their crowning achievement, their social shield against the world. But as they looked at the digital dashboard displaying zero balances and offshore wire transfers, the terrifying reality of their situation snapped into focus. The shield was gone. Jamal was not a millionaire logistics executive. He was a broke, soon-to-be divorced failure facing imminent foreclosure. He was no longer an asset. He was a massive, dangerous liability. I watched the psychological pivot happen in real time. The mathematical calculation was practically visible behind my mother's eyes. Vivian looked at her weeping son, then at the vicious woman who had robbed him blind. Finally, she turned her head and looked directly at me. Her gaze traveled over my tailored clothes, my calm posture, and the glowing screen projecting a $600 million corporate valuation. The son she had worshipped was financially dead, but she had suddenly discovered a billionaire standing in her living room. The transformation was breathtaking in its sheer audacity. Vivian's posture completely shifted. The panicked, rigid tension melted from her shoulders. She stepped away from the dining table, physically turning her back on Jamal. She smoothed the front of her silk dress and walked toward me, her face breaking into a bright, maternal, sickeningly sweet smile. "Kendra, my beautiful, brilliant girl." Vivian cooed, her voice dripping with an artificial warmth that made my skin crawl. She clasped her hands together in front of her chest, playing the role of a proud, loving mother, as if she had not just spent the evening calling me a liar and a threat. "I always knew you had this extraordinary fire inside of you. I always told your aunts that you were the truly gifted one in this family. I always said our Kendra does not need anyone to hold her hand. She is a pioneer. Just look at the magnificent empire you have built." I stared at her, utterly repulsed by the ease with which she discarded her favorite child. "We only focused so heavily on your brother because he was so weak." Vivian continued, gesturing dismissively over her shoulder toward Jamal without even looking at him. "We knew he could not survive the harsh realities of the world without constant support. But you were different. You were a lioness. We let you fight your own battles because we knew you would conquer them. Our tough love made you the profound success you are today." Harrison caught the cue instantly. His legendary survival instinct overrode his patriarchal pride. He recognized that aggressively maintaining his authority over a bankrupt household would not save him from a federal indictment. He needed a new angle. He needed a new host to drain. He cleared his throat loudly, adjusting his silk tie and pulling his suit jacket straight. He walked around the table, carefully avoiding eye contact with Jamal, and took his place beside Vivian. "Your mother is absolutely right, Kendra," Harrison declared, his voice dropping into the resonant, authoritative cadence he typically reserved for leading church prayers or dominating boardrooms. "We are incredibly proud of you. This cybersecurity firm, this massive global valuation, it is truly a testament to the relentless work ethic I instilled in you. You are my true legacy." He paused, putting on a mask of solemn, righteous understanding. "You must understand, Kendra, the situation with David's life insurance was simply a terrible, desperate misunderstanding. We were blinded by our fear for Jamal. We were backed into a corner by that predator he married." Harrison pointed a rigid, accusatory finger at Lauren. "That woman brought a sickness into our family. She brought greed, manipulation, and worldly deceit. She poisoned Jamal's mind, and by extension, she deceived your mother and me. Jamal came to us desperate, claiming his marriage would fail, and our family name would be ruined if we did not help her boutique. I took that money because I was trying to save my son from her claws. I was acting out of desperate, misguided love. The sin was not malice, Kendra. The sin was loving a weak son too much." The sheer psychological gymnastics required to reframe federal wire fraud as an act of paternal martyrdom was staggering. He was looking me dead in the eye, washing his hands of the fact that he had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from his widowed daughter and orphaned grandson, actively shifting the entire weight of his crime onto Lauren and Jamal. "But we see clearly now," Harrison proclaimed, his voice booming with sudden, decisive authority. "Jamal is no longer my heir. A man who allows his wife to steal his wealth, a man who brings criminal exposure to his father's doorstep because he is too incompetent to manage his own household, is no son of mine." Jamal's head snapped up. His eyes were red and swollen, his face contorted in absolute agony. "Dad, please," Jamal choked out, taking a stumbling step toward our parents. "Do not do this." Harrison held up a hand like a traffic cop, his expression hardening into pure ice. "Do not speak to me," Harrison barked. "You have disgraced this family. You have destroyed the legacy I spent my life building. You are an absolute failure." Vivian nodded eagerly, tears streaming down her face as she turned her adoring gaze back to me. "We will cast them out, Kendra," she promised, her voice vibrating with desperation. "Your father will disown him tonight. We will throw them both out into the freezing snow. They will not take a single item from this house. They can walk out of that front door with nothing but the clothes on their backs. This house, this legacy, the family name, it all belongs exclusively to you now." Harrison took a step closer to me, his eyes gleaming with a familiar, hungry ambition. "We need to look to the future, Kendra," he urged, adopting the tone of a seasoned financial advisor. "You have built a $600 million empire. That is a staggering amount of capital. It requires a firm, experienced hand to guide it. You need a trusted advisory board. You need someone who understands corporate governance and generational wealth preservation. He smiled a wide, predatory grin. You need a family trust, Kendra. You need someone to shield your capital gains from federal taxation. I have deep connections in the financial sector. I know exactly how to structure a holding company that will protect your liquidity. Do not trust these corporate lawyers you have hired. They will bleed you dry with exorbitant fees. Let your father protect your assets. We can build a true dynasty together. Just let us help you, Kendra. Vivian begged, reaching out as if to touch my arm. I took a deliberate step back, ensuring she kept her distance. We can manage this wealth for you. We can protect your assets from people who might try to take advantage of you. You are so busy running the technical side of the company. Let us handle the financial administration. We are your real family. We are the only ones you can truly trust. The grotesque irony of their pitch hung heavily in the dining room. They were actively offering to manage my $600 million company directly after I had provided forensic proof that they embezzled $600,000 from my dead husband. They genuinely believed that offering up Jamal as a sacrifice would wipe their slate clean. They believed I was still that broken, desperate girl craving their validation, ready to hand over the keys to my kingdom just to hear them say they loved me. I stood perfectly still, letting their frantic, sickening promises echo against the walls. I looked at Jamal, who was sobbing openly, completely broken by the realization that his parents' love was tied exclusively to his net worth. I looked at Lauren, who was staring at my parents in horrified shock, finally realizing that the people who had funded her luxurious lifestyle would throw her to the wolves without a second thought. Then I looked at Harrison and Vivian. I felt absolutely no temptation. I felt no lingering desire for their approval. The childhood wound that had once ached for their affection had been completely cauterized by their breathtaking cruelty. They had proven in real time that their loyalty was a commodity bought and sold to the highest bidder, and I had no intention of buying it. The air in the dining room remained heavy, saturated with the stench of broken illusions and exposed greed. Harrison stood motionless, his face a mask of calculated contrition, while Vivian kept her hands clasped tightly against her chest, her eyes glistening with rehearsed tears. They were masters of the pivot, acrobats of deflection, who had spent their lives dancing through the wreckage of their own poor choices. Harrison finally broke the silence, his voice low and rich with the practiced cadence of a man who spent his life sermonizing from the pulpit of his own ego. Kendra, you must understand the immense crushing pressure we were under. Harrison began, his hands open in a gesture of supplication. Jamal came to us broken. He was desperate. He told us his marriage was collapsing, and that Lauren was threatening to drag our family name through the mud if we did not support her boutique. We were backed into a corner, forced to make an impossible choice between the image we spent decades cultivating and the reality of our son's failing life. I took those funds not out of malice, but out of a father's desperate, misguided love. I was trying to prevent a total disaster. The sin was not in the theft, but in the sheer weight of loving my children too much. I stared at him, my expression neutral, as he attempted to reframe a federal felony as a noble act of paternal martyrdom. He was looking at me with those familiar searching eyes, the ones that had once looked right through me when I was a struggling widow, but were now filled with a nauseating performative devotion. He was trying to wash his hands of the forgery, the deceit, and the years of systematic theft, neatly dumping the entirety of the blame onto Lauren's shoulders. Vivian didn't wait for a second beat. She rushed forward, her movements fluid, and practiced acting as if we were having a tearful reunion after years of misunderstanding. She reached out, her fingers trembling in the air as if she were terrified I would shatter if touched. "The Lord tests us, Kendra," she cried, her voice hitching with a manufactured, breathless emotion. "He tests families to reveal their true strength. He allowed us to be deceived by that venomous woman in our midst, so that the hidden truth could finally be brought to light. You are our truth, Kendra. You are the light that God sent to cleanse this house. I know you felt neglected growing up," she continued, her gaze locked onto mine with an intensity meant to mimic genuine connection. I know my heart aches with the knowledge that you felt less loved, less seen. But you must understand, we pushed you because we saw your staggering potential. We knew you were always destined for greatness. Jamal was always weak. We coddled him because he could not survive the world without us but you. You were a lioness. We let you fight your own battles because we knew you would conquer them. And look at you now. You are magnificent. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling a profound sense of detachment. She was actively attempting to rewrite 30 years of emotional abandonment and blatant gender-based neglect as some sort of divine character-building parenting strategy. She was trying to weaponize my childhood craving for her approval, dangling the parental validation I had spent 2 decades begging for, gambling that I was still that desperate, broken girl. "We will make this right," Kendra Harrison declared, his voice booming with a sudden, decisive authority. "I am disowning Jamal tonight. I am throwing them both out into the winter night. They will not take a single item from this estate. They can walk out of that front door with nothing but the clothes on their backs. This house, this legacy, the family name, it all belongs to you now." Vivian nodded vigorously, her face a portrait of eager surrender. "Just let us help you, Kendra. Let us be your family again. You do not need to carry this massive empire alone. We will cast them out. We will wipe our hands of Jamal and Lauren forever. Just let us stand by your side. You are our true daughter, our only daughter." They were offering me the ultimate twisted prize. They were offering to publicly sacrifice the golden child to banish the son they had worshipped and the daughter-in-law they had adored, all in exchange for access to my wealth. They were proving in real time that their love was a commodity bought and sold to the highest bidder. They thought I was a naive child who would be so dazzled by their fake reconciliation that I would simply hand over the keys to my boardroom. I stood perfectly still, letting their desperate, frantic promises echo against the walls. I looked at Jamal, who was sobbing openly on the floor, completely broken by the realization that his parents' love was tied exclusively to his utility. I looked at Lauren, who was staring at my parents in horrified shock, finally realizing that the people who had funded her lifestyle would throw her to the wolves without a second thought. Then I looked at Harrison and Vivian. I felt absolutely no temptation. I felt no lingering desire for their approval. The childhood wound that had once ached for their love had been completely cauterized by their breathtaking cruelty. "God did not forge my signature, Harrison," I said, my voice cold and flat, stripping away every ounce of their religious rhetoric. "The devil did not log into your banking portal and initiate a wire transfer from David's life insurance policy to a retail boutique. You did that. You committed a federal crime. You stole from a grieving widow." I took a step towards them, my presence dominating the space. "And you, Vivian, you did not push me to be a lioness. You ignored me because I was a girl who refused to conform to your pathetic, outdated standards of submission. You treated me like a burden because my intelligence threatened your fragile, superficial existence." Harrison's smile faltered, replaced by a twitch in his cheek. Vivian lowered her trembling hands, the fake tears drying instantly on her cheeks. "You think you can buy your way into my empire by sacrificing Jamal?" I continued, gesturing to the sobbing man on the floor. "You think kicking him out into the cold proves your loyalty to me? It only proves exactly what I just said. You are parasites. You are looking for a new host because your current one is completely drained. But I am not Jamal. I am not weak, I am not easily flattered, and I am not foolish enough to invite a thief into my organization." I pulled a thick, sealed envelope from the inside pocket of my coat and dropped it onto the dining table. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud next to the forensic bank statements. "I am not here to reconcile," I stated, my eyes locking with Harrison's terrified gaze. "I am not here to take my rightful place in this pathetic, crumbling dynasty. I am here to execute a corporate takeover." I pointed to the envelope. Inside that package is a legally binding property transfer agreement drafted by my real estate attorneys. As of yesterday morning, I purchased the outstanding debt on this estate. I own the mortgage you defaulted on. I own the land. I own the walls. I own the roof over your heads. Vivian gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Harrison swayed on his feet, all the color draining from his face, as the reality of my words struck him like a physical blow. "You are going to sign the deed over to me tonight in lieu of foreclosure," I commanded, my voice leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. "You are going to surrender all remaining assets in your name to cover the exact amount you stole from David's life insurance, plus interest and legal fees. If you sign those papers, I will not call the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I will not hand over the digital evidence of your wire fraud, and I will let you spend the rest of your miserable lives out of federal prison." I leaned in, ensuring they understood the absolute finality of my terms. "But if you hesitate, if you try to negotiate, or if you ever attempt to contact me or my son again, I will release the hounds. I will personally ensure you die in a federal cell." Harrison's face went through a rapid succession of emotions. Rage fought with panic, and ego collided with the crushing weight of impending total loss. He looked at the legal documents, then at me, searching for any flicker of the daughter he could bully, any sign of the girl who once sought his praise. He found nothing but a cold, impenetrable wall of determination. Jamal, finally pulling himself up from the floor, looked at his father with eyes full of betrayal and despair. But Harrison ignored him just as he had ignored me my entire life. Harrison reached for the pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely grip it. The patriarch was broken not by his own failures, but by the daughter he had deemed worthless. "Sign it," I whispered, "and then get out of my sight." The silence that followed was broken only by the scratching of the pen against the paper. Harrison signed first, then Vivian, their movements mechanical and robotic. The dynasty was officially over. I picked up the signed documents, checked them for completion, and nodded to myself. The game of power had shifted permanently. I was no longer the outsider seeking an invitation. I was the architect of their silence, the keeper of their fate, and the final arbiter of this family's legacy. I had not come for their love. I had come for the only thing they understood, and I had left them with nothing else. The dining room grew deathly quiet, the only sound the frantic, ragged breathing of Jamal as he crumpled on the floor. Harrison stared at the documents I had splayed across the mahogany, his face draining of all color until he looked like a waxwork of his former self. He reached for the repayment schedule, his fingers trembling so violently that the paper rattled in his grip. I watched him scan the terms, his eyes widening as he registered the sheer crushing weight of the financial obligation. "This is a life sentence of servitude," Harrison whispered, his voice stripped of its usual bravado. "You are asking for every cent of my retirement, every dividend, and every liquidated asset I have left. You are demanding I sign away the remainder of my life to pay for a mistake I made out of desperate love." I did not flinch. I did not soften my gaze. I remained a pillar of cold, unyielding iron. "You are not signing away your life, Harrison. You are signing away the proceeds of your theft. You are paying back the money you stole from a widow and a fatherless child. You should be thanking me that I am allowing you to pay in installments, rather than handing this evidence directly to the district attorney. Every payment will be logged. Every late arrival will trigger a pre-filed criminal complaint. If you miss a single deadline, if you are a single dollar short, I will not call you. I will not negotiate. I will send the sheriff to your door with handcuffs." Vivian let out a sharp, strangled sob, reaching for the edge of the table to steady herself. "Kendra, please. We are your parents. We have always provided for you. How can you be so ruthless to the people who brought you into this world?" I looked at her, my expression devoid of the warmth she was desperately fishing for. "You brought me into this world, Vivian, but you spent every subsequent year wishing I was someone else. You didn't raise a daughter. You raised a trophy, and when I became too sharp for your display case, you discarded me. Do not lecture me on ruthlessness. You taught me that value is determined by assets and performance. I am simply applying your own curriculum to your current reality." I then gestured to the second document sitting atop the pile. It was a formal eviction notice for Jamal and Lauren. "This is for your son," I stated, my voice echoing in the cavernous room. "I bought the mortgage on his current residence 3 weeks ago. He is in default. He has 48 hours to vacate the premises. He is no longer your problem, and he is certainly not mine. Jamal's head snapped up from the floor, his face a mask of bewildered fury. You bought my house. How could you do that? You had no right to interfere in my private affairs. I turned to him, offering the first genuine smile of the evening, a thin, mirthless line. Your private affairs were funded by my inheritance, Jamal. I am not interfering. I am collecting. You have spent your entire adult life pretending to be a captain of industry while living in a house owned by my bank. That facade is over. Lauren, who had been standing by the door with her coat zipped and her bags packed, finally spoke. She looked at Jamal with a mixture of pity and finality. Stop begging them, Jamal. They don't care about you anymore. You've lost your utility. She turned her gaze to me, her voice devoid of its usual sharp edge. I knew you were the one to watch Kendra. I just never thought you would be this surgical. I ignored her. My attention was fixed entirely on the couple who had spent 3 decades teaching me that I was a liability. I pulled the final document from my coat pocket and slid it across the table toward Harrison. This is a cease and desist order, I informed them, my voice crisp and professional. It prohibits you from mentioning my name, my late husband's name, or my son's name in any public forum, foundation event, or social circle. You are not to use our identities to leverage social capital or to solicit donations for your dwindling circle of influence. You will not claim me as a success story to fix your failing reputation. If I hear one rumor, if I see one social media post, or if any of your friends contact me claiming you are proud of me, I will consider it a violation of this agreement and proceed with a defamation lawsuit that will leave you with nothing but the clothes on your backs. Harrison stared at the document, his lips moving silently as he processed the total erasure of his public persona. He was being muzzled, stripped of his ability to hide behind his fabricated family values. You are burying us alive, Harrison said, his voice barely audible. I am simply clearing the debris, I countered. You built a foundation on lies, theft, and the systematic belittling of your own daughter. Now the structure has collapsed. I am not the one burying you. I am just making sure you stay under the rubble where you belong. I stood up, the chair scraping sharply against the floor. I checked my watch, the gold links gleaming in the soft chandelier light. I have a board meeting in 2 hours, and I have wasted enough of my time on this relic of a family. You have until midnight to sign these papers and email them back to my office. Failure to do so will result in the immediate release of the evidence files to the authorities. I walked toward the foyer, my heels clicking on the marble floor with rhythmic military precision. I did not look back. I did not offer a final compassionate glance at the people who had raised me in a vacuum of love. As I reached the heavy oak front door, I paused, my hand on the handle. The air outside was biting and cold, a sharp contrast to the stifling, perfume-heavy atmosphere of the dining room. I stepped out into the winter night, the crisp oxygen flooding my lungs, cleaning out the last traces of their presence from my system. My driver was waiting by the black sedan, the engine idling with a low, powerful hum. Kendra. I heard Vivian's voice trailing after me, desperate and shrill, but I did not break my stride. I climbed into the back seat, the leather cool and welcoming. As the car pulled away from the estate, I took out my phone and pulled up the security feed for the dining room. On the screen, I watched them. Harrison was hunched over the table, his head in his hands. Vivian was standing over him, her face contorted in an ugly, silent argument. Jamal was still sitting on the floor, looking up at the ceiling, his mouth agape, as if he were trying to comprehend the sheer scale of the void that had just opened up beneath his feet. The scene was perfect. It was a masterpiece of total, unconditional loss. They had spent their entire lives treating me as an expendable variable, a background character in their own dramatic tragedy. Now they were the ones standing in the ruins, waiting for a savior who would never come. I leaned back against the headrest, closing my eyes. I thought about the files I had been collecting for years, the forensic accounting reports, the recorded phone calls, the emails, the paper trail of their hubris. I had been planning this moment for a decade, waiting for the precise second when their arrogance would make them the most vulnerable. I had been careful, I had been methodical, and I had been absolutely relentless. The car glided smoothly onto the highway, leaving the house behind, leaving the guilt-ridden ghosts of my past in the rearview mirror. I was not just successful, I was unburdened. I was the architect of my own destiny, the builder of my own future, and the only person in the world who could tell me who I was. As I watched the city skyline emerge on the horizon, the buildings rising like monoliths of my own ambition, I felt a deep, profound sense of accomplishment. I had not come here for an apology. I had not come here to heal old wounds or bridge long-standing gaps. I had come to finish a job. I had come to remind them that the daughter they ignored had become the woman they would fear. And as the city lights began to surround me, I knew that tomorrow the world would wake up to a different reality. The story of their greatness was finished. The era of my empire had truly begun. My phone vibrated with a message from my assistant, reminding me of the merger integration meeting, scheduled for 8 a.m. I started typing a reply outlining the agenda, delegating the final tasks, and organizing the next wave of corporate expansion. My mind was already leagues ahead of the house I had just left, focused on growth on scale and on the future. I had no room for the debris of the past. It belonged to them, and they were finally entirely and irrevocably accountable for it. The silence that followed Harrison's frantic signing of the deeds was heavy and suffocating, thick with the scent of expensive wine and rotting reputations. I pulled the documents toward me, stacking them with precise rhythmic motions that sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. I didn't say a word, allowing their anxiety to fester to bloom into the realization that their power had vanished along with their bank accounts. I reached into my bag and produced a sleek silver flash drive. I placed it gently on the table right next to the signed foreclosure documents. Jamal stared at it. His breathing had become jagged, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He looked like a man standing on the precipice of a canyon, finally seeing the drop. "You think this is over, Jamal?" I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "You think you can just weep your way out of this? You spent years mocking my career, calling me lucky, calling me a shadow of the family legacy you were busy torching. You enjoyed every cent of the insurance payout while I scraped by, paying off the debt of your incompetence. But tonight the ledger is balanced, is." Harrison tried to rise his face, a mask of purple-veined fury that he was desperately trying to suppress for the sake of the documents I held. "Kendra, this is not necessary. We are willing to accept the terms. We are willing to cooperate. Do not escalate this further." I looked at him, feeling nothing but a profound detached amusement at his sudden pivot to subservience. "The only reason this is not escalating into a criminal trial is because I have decided that your exile is more painful than your imprisonment. I want you to vanish. I want you to leave this city and never utter my name again. If I see you in public, if I hear of you attempting to leverage our shared bloodline, I will personally see to it that the authorities receive the unredacted files from this drive." Jamal let out a guttural sound, something between a laugh and a sob. He had been staring at the flash drive as if it contained his own death warrant. His hands were curled into tight fists at his sides, his knuckles white against the mahogany of the table. He looked at Lauren, who remained unmoved, her gaze fixed on the exit, her soul already halfway out the door. He looked at our parents, who were currently busy distancing themselves from his very existence. He had no money, no social standing, and now no parents. The golden child had been stripped of his gilded armor, revealing the terrified empty shell underneath. "You have nothing, Jamal," I whispered, leaning in close enough for him to smell the expensive perfume he used to mock. "You have no wife, no career, and no family. You are a ghost, Jamal, a ghost haunting a house that belongs to me." Jamal's eyes darted to the eviction notices, then to the silver flash drive, and finally to the signed deed. A dangerous, frantic light sparked in his pupils. His body coiled, his muscles tensing in a way that screamed of impending violence. He had spent his life being handed everything, and he was incapable of accepting that the game had finally changed. He wouldn't face the reality of his ruin. He would try to destroy the evidence of it. With a primal scream, Jamal lunged. He didn't go for me. He went for the table. He surged forward with a desperate, clumsy force, his hands outstretched like claws, aiming to swipe the legal documents and the flash drive into the dark, churning mess of the centerpiece. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I had anticipated this reaction, the final pathetic flare-up of a man who believed that if he could just break the physical objects, he could somehow break the truth. Before Jamal's fingers could even touch the edge of the mahogany table, the dining room door burst open. Two of my private security detail, tall, imposing men in charcoal suits, moved with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. They didn't hit him. They didn't need to. They simply intercepted him, their heavy hands clamping onto his shoulders, driving him down into the floorboards with overwhelming, practiced force. Jamal's scream turned into a stifled grunt as his face was pressed firmly into the carpet. He thrashed his legs, kicking wildly, but he was pinned, rendered completely impotent by the sheer physical superiority of the men I had hired. It was a humiliating spectacle, the former heir of the Henderson estate being restrained like a common thug in his own dining room. Harrison and Vivian remained frozen in their chairs, their faces pale and horrified. They didn't try to help him. They didn't even shout. They watched their son being restrained with a cold, analytical detachment, as if they were observing a failed experiment being removed from the lab. "Get him out of here," I commanded, my voice devoid of any emotion. "Take him to the car." They hauled Jamal up, his body limp, his spirit clearly shattered. He didn't even struggle as they marched him toward the exit. He just stared into the middle distance, his mouth hanging open, his mind completely gone. Lauren watched him pass without a hint of sadness, her face as hard as flint. She stepped around him, not bothering to look back, and pushed through the front door, vanishing into the night. Vivian began to weep, but it was a dry, hollow sound, lacking any genuine connection to the man who had just been dragged from the room. She looked at me, her eyes desperate, searching for a way to save herself from the wreckage. "Kendra, you cannot do this. We are your mother and father. You are our blood." I picked up the signed documents, tucking them neatly into my envelope. "You are the people who raised me to be a pawn in your social chess game, Vivian. I am just changing the rules of the game. You wanted a dynasty. You wanted to manage my wealth. You wanted to be the power behind the throne. Well, you are currently standing in the throne room, but you have been stripped of your titles." Harrison stood up, his legs shaking. He tried to reclaim some shred of his lost authority, his chest puffing out, but it was a pathetic, empty gesture. "This house is still ours until midnight," he declared, his voice trembling. "We still have rights." I looked at my watch. "You have 7 hours, Harrison. Use them well. Pack your belongings. Leave the family heirlooms that you used to inflate your own sense of self-worth. If I find this place damaged, if you try to take the antique silver or the original paintings that were purchased with the money from my trust, I will add those charges to the list." I turned my back on them, walking toward the grand staircase. I didn't care where they went. I didn't care how they survived. They were nothing more than obsolete code in a system I had already rewritten. As I walked up the stairs, leaving the wreckage of my past behind, I felt an extraordinary lightness. I had spent a decade feeling small, feeling burdened by the weight of their expectations, and feeling the constant dull ache of their indifference. I had carried that burden until my muscles were tired and my spirit was frayed. But tonight, I had put it all down. I reached the landing, pausing for a moment to look down into the foyer. The house was silent, save for the muffled, distant sound of my security detail closing the front door. The dynasty was dead. My empire was just beginning. I walked into the primary suite, the room where I had been raised, the room where I had been told who I was supposed to be. I began to pack the few items I had kept from my youth: a small silver picture frame, a handful of books, a locket that held the only picture I had of David. I felt no nostalgia. The room didn't feel like home. It felt like a cage I had finally broken out of. My phone vibrated, signaling an incoming message from my office. The corporate merger integration was on track, the acquisition of the competitor was finalized, and my team was ready for the next phase of the global expansion. I stood in the center of the room, looking at the familiar walls for the last time. They didn't know who I was. They had never known. They had built a life out of paper, and I had simply provided the flame. The debt was repaid, the accounts were balanced, and the truth had been served. They had tried to break me, but they only succeeded in forcing me to become the woman who would inevitably break them. I walked out of the room, my footsteps firm and confident. I made my way to the front door, the heavy oak swinging open to reveal the city waiting for me. I didn't look back at the grand estate. I didn't care to see them one more time. I stepped out into the crisp, cool air, the silence of the night wrapping around me like a shroud. I was leaving the dynasty behind, and I was stepping into my future. My life was finally my own, a blank slate, a masterpiece in progress. The fire was extinguished, but from the ashes, I was already rising untouchable, unbreakable, and absolutely free. The world wouldn't know what hit it when I was through. My transformation was complete and the dynasty had met its final irreversible end. The dining room air turned frigid as Jamal's body collided with the expensive mahogany table. The impact sent silver cutlery scattering across the floor with a cacophony of ringing metal. He did not get the chance to grab the flash drive or the eviction notices. My security detail, two men with the cold, immovable presence of granite statues, descended upon him in a blur of motion. They forced him downward, pinning his chest against the polished wood, and then driving him firmly into the plush carpet. Jamal's roar of impotent rage was muffled instantly by the thick fibers of the rug. I did not move an inch. My breathing remained rhythmic and steady, a sharp contrast to the chaotic gasping of the man currently pinned at my feet. Harrison and Vivian remained anchored in their chairs, their faces drained of blood, their hands clutched tightly in their laps. They watched their golden son being restrained like a common criminal, yet their eyes betrayed no parental instinct to intervene. They were calculating the damage to their own survival. "Stop struggling, Jamal," I commanded, my voice devoid of tremor. "You are only accelerating your own humiliation. The more you thrash, the more you resemble the desperate, entitled child you have always been." Jamal's body went rigid under the weight of the guards, his eyes darting toward me with a mixture of terror and unadulterated hatred. He realized then that the rules of his existence had been completely rewritten. He was no longer the protected heir. He was a liability being cleared from the room. "Get him out of my sight," I instructed the guards. "Take him to the foyer and ensure he remains there until he can control his basic motor functions. I have no interest in watching him continue this pathetic display of physical ineptitude." The guards hauled him upward, his legs dragging behind him as he continued to curse under his breath, his words disjointed and senseless. He was a shell of the man who had sat at this table 10 minutes prior, convinced of his own untouchable status. As the heavy doors closed behind them, the silence that rushed back into the room was absolute, punctuated only by the distant muffled sound of Jamal's erratic shouting. I turned my attention back to my parents. They were financially and socially naked, stripped of the influence they had wielded over me for decades. I gathered the flash drive and the signed deeds, sliding them into my bag with methodical care. Every movement was deliberate, a final demonstration of the absolute control I now exerted over their lives. "You built this family on a foundation of transactional love," I said, finally addressing them directly. "You taught me that my value was tied to what I could provide for you, how well I could represent your image, and how silent I could remain regarding your transgressions. I have spent the last 10 years proving that I could build something magnificent in the shadow of your neglect. You tried to starve me, but I learned to feast on the opportunities you were too blind to see." Harrison's lips parted, but no sound emerged. He looked around the dining room, perhaps finally noticing the dust on the crown, molding the faded wallpaper, and the signs of a household that had been coasting on past glories for far too long. "You have nothing left, Harrison," I continued. "You have no money, no leverage, and no son to play your games for you. You have been evicted from the life you thought was your birthright. I am not the daughter you wanted, but I am the woman you created." I walked toward the foyer, my coat flowing behind me. I paused at the threshold, looking back at the wreckage. There lay the broken crystal, the scattered legal filings, and the heavy, lingering presence of their defeat. They looked small, fragile, and utterly inconsequential. "This is my final warning to both of you," I said, my voice cold and final. If you attempt to contact me, if you try to beg for mercy, or if you seek to manipulate another member of my organization, I will release every piece of data on that flash drive to the public. Your reputation will not just be damaged, it will be incinerated. Your history, your assets, and your status will be exposed for exactly what they are, the byproduct of fraud and theft. Vivian let out a choked sound, her face buried in her hands. Harrison simply stared at the floor, the weight of his reality finally pressing down upon him. "The game is over," I said. "You are on your own." I stepped into the foyer, my hand gripping the heavy handle of the front door. The cool night air rushed in to meet me, a sharp contrast to the stale, suffocating atmosphere of the house. I stepped out onto the porch, listening to the soft murmur of my security team as they held Jamal near the waiting sedan. I did not look back. I did not offer a final lingering goodbye. I had already said everything that needed to be said. My driver held the door of the sedan open for me. I slid into the back seat, the quiet luxury of the car, providing a stark, soothing contrast to the violence and volatility I had just left behind. As the vehicle pulled away, I watched the grand estate shrink in the distance until it was nothing more than a dark silhouette against the moonlight. I pulled my phone from my pocket and typed a single message to my lead counsel. "Begin the acquisition of the secondary assets tomorrow morning at dawn. I want every remaining thread of their empire under my control before the sun rises." I leaned back and watched the city skyline approach, the lights of the skyscrapers sparkling like diamonds against the dark horizon. I had stripped them of their power, their pride, and their future. I had taken the very thing they valued most, their standing in the world, and replaced it with a crushing, permanent silence. The dynasty was officially gone, and in its place I was forging a legacy that had nothing to do with their influence or their approval. I was finally, truly, my own person. The cold winter air through the partially open window felt like a promise of all the things I would now achieve without them. The final barrier had been removed, and the path forward was entirely blissfully my own. The heavy oak door of the Henderson estate clicked shut, sealing away 3 decades of manufactured resentment and cold ambition. I did not look back. The biting winter air felt like a baptism, stripping away the lingering warmth of that toxic house and leaving me with nothing but the sharp, clear reality of my own design. I walked down the stone path, my heels striking the pavement with a finality that resonated in the quiet night. My driver Marcus stood ready by the black sedan. He opened the door for me, his expression unreadable, and I slipped into the back seat. The interior was an oasis of soft leather and muted ambient light. My son Leo was curled up in the corner, his small head resting on the nanny's shoulder as a soft animated cartoon played on his tablet. He was oblivious to the wreckage I had just left behind, completely insulated from the greed and the petty power plays that had defined his grandparents' lives. I watched him for a moment, his breathing slow and peaceful. He would never know what it was like to be a pawn in their game. He would never be measured by their pathetic standards or starved for an approval that came with strings attached. As the car pulled onto the main road, the city lights began to blur into a streak of amber and white. The transition from the suffocating history of the Henderson estate to the expansive potential of the city felt like a physical weight lifting from my shoulders. I was no longer the daughter who had to ask for permission. I was the architect of a new order. The fallout was swift and absolute, far more brutal than even I had calculated. Back at the estate, the silence I left in my wake was soon replaced by the sounds of total dissolution. Jamal and Lauren, the golden children who had relied entirely on the inheritance I had successfully reclaimed, immediately turned on each other with the same viciousness they had once reserved for me. Their divorce proceedings were a public spectacle, a war of attrition fought in the high-stakes arena of elite family law. Every hidden debt, every failed investment, and every illicit transaction was paraded before the courts to ensure the other gained nothing. The legal battles drained the last of Harrison and Vivian's liquid capital. The life support for their social standing, which had been artificially sustained by my late husband's insurance money and my own hard work, flickered and died. Within months, the estate was auctioned off to cover the mounting legal fees and creditor claims. Harrison and Vivian, once the pillars of their social circle, were reduced to footnotes in the local business journals, remembered only for the spectacular implosion of their name. They vanished into the obscurity they had so long feared, forced to inhabit a world where their last name carried no weight and their opinions held no sway. I did not pause to gloat. My focus shifted instantly to the expansion of my foundation and the continued growth of my firm. I poured my resources into initiatives that prioritized genuine mentorship and systemic change, creating a legacy that was built on contribution rather than extraction. I watched from a distance as my former family crumbled into the dust of their own making. It was a strange, hollow satisfaction to see the reality of their character finally displayed for all to see. I raised Leo in a home defined by unconditional support and the absolute security of generational wealth that I had earned through my own persistence. We spent our mornings in the garden discussing the world, exploring books, and fostering his curiosity. I ensured that he was surrounded by people who loved him for his spirit, not his status. We traveled, we learned, and we built a life that was rich with experience. The toxicity of the Henderson past was a foreign country to him, a place he would never have to visit. My professional life reached new heights of influence. By dedicating myself to the firm's growth and the foundation's impact, I secured my seat at the table as a leader of true substance. I had shed the identity of the daughter they wanted and embraced the identity of the woman I had become. The peace I had sought for so long was finally mine. It was not a peace of forgetting. It was a peace of total, absolute command. I had learned that when you refuse to play by the rules of those who seek to diminish you, you don't just win the game. You change the entire board. Every morning when I sat at my desk looking out over the city that I was helping to shape, I felt the absence of their criticism as a quiet, steady joy. I had taken the fire they lit to consume me and used it to light the way for my own future. My path was no longer cluttered with their demands. My days were no longer shadowed by their judgment. The dynasty was a memory, a cautionary tale I told myself when I needed to remember the importance of resilience. I had emerged from the fire not just unburned, but forged into something stronger, something permanent. The empire I built was mine in every sense of the word, and as Leo laughed in the other room, I knew that the greatest victory wasn't the documents I held, but the life I had created in the aftermath. It was a life of absolute, uncompromised peace. True power is not inherited or granted by those who seek to diminish you. It is forged through the unyielding commitment to your own worth. When you stop chasing validation from an empty well, you finally create the space to flourish on your own terms. True resilience means setting boundaries that protect your peace, rather than performing for the approval of those who never truly saw you. Break the cycle of expectation, reclaim your narrative, and realize that your greatest success is living a life defined entirely by your own integrity and truth. If this story inspired you to reclaim your power, like and subscribe for more journeys of resilience.